Well, welcome everybody to Beaver Politics. On Monday nights, we talk about Indigenous matters and Indigenous issues that are relevant to today. And also importantly, right now, talking about how we can motivate more Indigenous participation in the upcoming election. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory on Turtle Island in what's known as province of Alberta, Canada. And I welcome all the conversation and I invite anyone to come and join us. Something to keep in mind with Indigenous people, even though our voter turnout is sometimes low compared to the rest of Canada, politics plays a role in our lives every single day. The government of Canada, if for First Nations people that live on reserve, the government of Canada makes decisions about our housing, they make decisions about our healthcare, about our education, about our infrastructure, about our governance, about our rights. And the provinces, they make decisions that impact us when it comes to land management, water resources, access to lands, resource management, resource development. All of those types of matters are really important to us. So of all Canadian people, Indigenous people have a really tight history with the government and at all levels. Maybe less so the municipalities, but they're starting to actually participate more with Indigenous people in understanding the role they play in our lives. So it's really critical that we have these conversations. And I invite anyone to come up. And right now, one of the main focuses of Indigenous Matters as we're right currently is talking about how we can encourage our folks to vote and participate in elections. And something for those of you that maybe haven't been around First Nations that live and work on reserve is that many folks in those circumstances don't see the government of Canada as their government. They elect their chief and councils, and their chief and councils have the relationship with the crown, which is either Canada or the province. So sometimes there's that reliance on that relationship to represent their interests at those tables. Unfortunately, we've all seen and heard about there's sometimes maybe not the best governance on every nation. And that's just related to our histories and our healing and the struggles that we've had in a colonial process that's been basically imposed upon us. But I'd like to open up the conversation and maybe we can start a little bit with what's close to home here in Alberta, thinking about our Premier, Danielle Smith. Two things have happened in the last week. First off was the Kevin O'Leary or the O'Leary Ventures press release that was issued about the AI data facility proposed in the MD of Greenview here in Alberta. And why that's important is that these are crown lands that they're proposing to develop this project on. And crown lands are lands that have been set aside for public use, but also been set aside for the practice of Indigenous rights. And Indigenous rights in Canada are threefold. They're inherent rights. Those are the rights that we're born with, that Creator gives us, that we just naturally come with. We have our treaty rights. Those are rights that were negotiated through treaty and the signings of the treaty from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and there's still modern treaties being negotiated today. And we have constitutional rights. So in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of Canada, affirms and upholds and recognizes the rights held by the Indigenous people in Canada, which are defined to be the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. So because of this, our rights being unique and tied to land, crown lands are where we practice these rights. And it's really critical that we have a conversation with governments before they issue any types of approvals or have conversations with folks with regards to how these crown lands are being used. So that's why that's a really important piece, is there was no consultation done with the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation or any other First Nations or Métis that use that area. So that's an imposition on our rights and a potential project being considered without considering the impacts to those rights. And that was made unilaterally, that decision. Then it comes out in the news the other day that Mr. O'Leary has come clean and said that the province of Alberta actually approached him on this project and wanted him to propose the project. So there's been some, it's becoming apparent that the government of Alberta is not taking into consideration the relationship that they have with First Nations and Métis in this province. So that's one thing. The other thing that happened here in Alberta now, during the inauguration, it was announced, of course, the timing is everything, right? While we're not paying attention to what's happening here in Alberta because we're all busy watching the inauguration, Brian Jean makes an announcement to lift the coal moratorium and to open up the opportunity for coal development in the Eastern Slopes once again. So that again is another impact, not just to Indigenous people. There's 70% of Albertans did not support this coal policy. So I want to talk about some of those things, but of course I'm open to anything else in our Indigenous way. I like for everyone to take the opportunity to speak your turn. Let us know when you're finished so that we can move on to the next one. And what I'd like to do is I'll try to just go through each person that's on the panel, give you an opportunity to speak to the matter, raise other issues if you'd like to. We can always circle back. We, in our way, we are oral people. We like to talk about things, and we always end up finding our way back to what we came to talk about anyways. So I'm not real rigid on, let's just talk about one thing here or there, or, whatever. If you have other issues you want to bring up, please do. And when you're finished, let me know so then we can move on to the next person, because we don't have the features to raise your hand or take turns like we would on a Teams meeting or something. But I do want to be respectful to each other, try to approach our conversation like we would if we were in a circle and if we had our talking stick available to us. So I would like to open the floor to Nikki. You're on my screen, you're at the top. And we'll go counterclockwise, clockwise, which is also in our way. I have 8 spaces for those of you that are not Indigenous and may not know some of our protocols and our ways of doing things. In the Cree way, we try to do everything in 4s. So I have 8 spaces up here open for conversation. And we also try to move through things in a clockwise direction. So that is kind of the way of the Cree people where I live and whom share their teachings with me. So Nikki, I would like to open the floor to you if you'd like to add to the conversation about resource development, or if you have other things that you want to talk about, please, the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, Ellen, thank you. Gwe Delawisi Nikki. I am from the Mi'kmaq Nation here in Mi'kma'ki, which is unceded territory.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, we lost you for a second there. Maybe her service went out. She just paused her live now. So maybe we have a connectivity issue. Nikki, I'm gonna let you pause there, and we'll move over to Smarshy. We won't forget about you. I promise, Nikki. We'll come back as soon as you're back into the live. Go ahead, Smarshy, my friend. Take it away.
Okay, I'm from the Métis Nation, Red River Settlement, Winnipeg, Manitoba. I am Prairie Cree, and I am in Alberta, unfortunately. And the one thing I wanted to talk about was this is a precedence that we need to set, that our land is not something that you can just take. Ownership was never a thing in Indigenous history and throughout our culture. It was never who owned the land. It was whoever made the land flourish, and whoever planted and took care of the land and all that. So for people in the comments that are saying conquered land, you don't make treaties with people who are conquered. You make treaties with people who you have taken something against their will. So that's all I want to say for now. And I do want to say that I believe our government needs a shift in whatever, because right now Danielle Smith is not doing what she needs to be doing for all people. And that also includes the Indigenous people of Alberta and provincially everywhere. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Smarshy. And you're right, absolutely bang on. Nations make treaties, treaties don't make nations. And we hear this a lot. Oh, you were conquered and or there was wars and somehow we were defeated. And that's not the case at all. We signed treaties, nation to nation treaties. So thank you very much, Smarshy, for bringing that up because that is completely relevant every day. It's part of our treaty relationship. And I think a lot of Canadians don't have a deep understanding of that history. So I appreciate that you brought that up. We are all treaty people. And again, you're right. We aren't owners of land. We are stewards of land. I did a video myself too on the Treaty 6 Birders, my page. And one of the greatest teachings I've ever gained is the teaching of we are the land and the land is us, and how we're the pitiful ones. We need water, we need soil, we need vegetation, we need the animals, we need the air. None of it needs us to survive. So that was a real deep and meaningful teaching for me in my career, and I carry it with me every day. So let's pass the torch over to Jana. I welcome you to join the conversation, and I'm really happy to see you here again this week. Thanks, Jana.
Hi, thank you. I am a YT woman. I do have a very tiny smidge of Métis in me from my DNA test. I'm French Canadian or half French Canadian, and my kids have a little bit more Métis in them from their dad. But I definitely I look like a YT woman. So, should I do a land acknowledgement? Would it be okay if I did, or
Absolutely, I
feel
would
like
love
I'm going
that.
to talk here?
Yes.
And forgive me if I get any of the names wrong, like mispronounce anything, but I do respectfully acknowledge that I live and work on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Dakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, and Inuit. I greatly respect their various histories, languages, and cultures, and I'm honored to be able to continue to grow and learn on this land.
Hi,
So-
hi. Thank
Hi.
you.
So thank
Hi.
you so much for having me today. I am an ally, and my biggest concern, I'm also Albertan, as you might have known by Treaty 6. And smarshy smarsh, it is tough being a lefty in Alberta, and it is tough being Indigenous in Alberta. There is a lot of anti-Indigenous racism that we see out here. I think and as for Danielle Smith, you guys probably all know that I have a petition up to ask Danielle Smith to step down. I'm getting a lot of heat from that, but I'm not stopping. If anybody has not signed it, there's one for all of Canada now, because I think Canadians have a right. She went and represented all of Canada when she went down to Mar-a-Lago, in my opinion. So I don't know if it's legal or anything, but I think we need to send a message. So that's really what it's about. Once we get more signatures, I will look into legalities. But I just wanted to say, I think my biggest, thank you. My biggest thing right now is trying to work with getting the Indigenous people to let their voices be heard, because I'm scared I think we all know that he is worse than any other option, well, except maybe the CPP or whatever that other party is. But you know what I mean? Like, he is not going to do anything to help the Indigenous. In fact, I think he is going to go backwards, just like we're seeing in the United States. And that scares the shit out of me. It really does. Yeah.
And thank you for bringing that up. And like when we look at his, I don't even know if it's his most recent talking point, but when he's talking about being unapologetic for our history, when he talks about like romanticizing the days of John A. Macdonald, he is telling us who he is. And we can look at his record. His voting record speaks for itself. And I thank you for bringing up the prejudice of it within Alberta. My husband and I moved from Calgary to rural Alberta. And where we live, we actually have some neighbors that participated in the convoy, and we have some folks that have flown the F Trudeau flags and things like that. And I actually was on the land some time ago now, a couple months back. And my neighbors actually fired guns when they saw me out in the land. And I
Oh,
feel like it was an intimidation to me. And
mhm.
when we don't vote as Indigenous people, we're allowing space for that because nobody's out there voting, for us all the time, right? And we need to have our voices heard because when we have politicians like Mr. Polyev, who seem to promote that type of attitude, it becomes quite problematic, and then we end up with systemic racism because they build the systems and the policies and they implement all of these types of actions that result in racist behavior. So thank you, Jenna, for bringing that up.
Oh, no problem. I can't talk about my job specifically, but I certainly see it. It's undeniable to me.
100%. Is there anything more you wanted to chat about, or shall I move on to Vic?
No, mostly just talking about how to get the word out to Indigenous folks that that even if the voting is not something they've felt is because I understand the perspective that they are not part of Canada, and I understand that completely, but it affects you so deeply.
It truly does, and I appreciate that you understand that. And I encourage anyone that does have Indigenous people in your life, with colleagues, friends, family, if you can encourage them to vote, like even if it's only this one time, to get us through this hurt. This, like we said, it's a critical um, turning point in our history right now, and it's really important that all Canadians get out and our voices are heard and we see ourselves in the results from those elections.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Jenna. And we'll circle back. We'll have an opportunity to talk more about different issues and things. Vic, welcome to Beaver Politics and Indigenous Matters. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba, the homeland of the Red River Métis. I am not Indigenous, but I have many, many friends and colleagues and support the community immensely. I think the community. I've learned to love Indigenous culture. I've, yeah. So with that being said, though, I am also like of the same mind in trying to think of how and what is it that kind of are the hurdles that Indigenous people may feel in regards to going to vote and what they feel like maybe if their vote doesn't count or whatever, and how do we message to them that it's extremely valuable that they do. Because I can only assume that a lot of Indigenous people would probably, or majority of Indigenous people would probably fall in line with the same political ideology of like the NDP, a more leftist mindset. Or unless I'm wrong, that's an assumption on my part.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. Maybe here in Alberta, we do have a little more sometimes right leaning folks that have worked a lot in the
Oh,
oil field, have been exposed to more conservative thought and, colleagues and friends. Because, we are, my mom used to always say to me, show me who your friends are, I'll show you who you are. So that's fair, though. And another thing, like, in my experience, is the mistrust of government, and rightfully so. Like government has been doing its best to do its worst for us, over the last couple centuries. So I can understand why people don't vote. But I really appreciate to have folks like you, Vic, and something, and also Jana, our non-Indigenous friends that are around this table. Something I think about that if I'm a voter, but if I were not a voter, maybe something that would compel me as an Indigenous person, because we are compassionate and caring for the most part, is if we hear from you that it's important to you that we come out to vote too, because these issues they're affecting all of us. Like, for example, when we think about President Trump's desire for our water now. This is something that'll impact us all. And it's Indigenous rights that are going to prevent access to those waters because nobody can take these resources without going through the consultation processes and without regulatory oversight, which includes Indigenous voices. So maybe that's some of the messaging that we can share with our Indigenous friends. So I appreciate that. I see you, Smarshy, but I just want to make sure, Vic, did you have anything more you want to add before I turn the floor and let Smarshy add to the conversation?
The only one last thing I want to add is I've had many conversations with Wab Canoe, our premier here. He's an amazing individual, and I'm hoping that sends a message to all communities that their voice matters and they can make a difference. And that's all I have.
100%. Thank you for sharing that. And what a blessing to know him and have the opportunity to talk with him. From what I'm seeing as an outsider looking into Manitoba, it looks like some really good things are happening there. To tell you the truth, my husband and I actually talked many times lately about maybe it's a place we want to go and live. So thank you, Vic. I
Very beautiful,
appreciate.
and you're more than welcome to.
Awesome. Thank you. Smarshy, you wanted to add to this.
I wanted to add something, but I also think we forgot Moose because we were going in clockwise. Or
Yeah, we're
oh,
going
never mind.
clockwise in my screen, so
Oh, okay. So yeah, I saw the wrong. No, I agree with what other people are saying, and we do need to strengthen our numbers. But I also think that we need to talk to Elections Canada and somehow set up a way that Indigenous people can vote without feeling uncomfortable. Because I know that most polling stations in Alberta are done in churches or schools. And I have known that when I was voting, this woman was standing over my shoulder when I was voting, and I felt very uncomfortable and very unsafe, right? In a church of all things, right?
yeah.
Everyone's like, "Oh, it's just a church," but it may be just a church for you guys, but for me, it's a whole different ballgame. And I think that's really something that we need to do for our Indigenous people to have that safety of voting and knowing that our vote is actually going to make it. Because I don't think my vote actually made it, and that's
Yeah, that is quite concerning. And I do recall the last two elections, I'm pretty sure there were polling stations on a lot of the First Nations here in Alberta, anyways. I can't speak if that was the truth across the country, but you're right. Like, that is a barrier. And even when you think about, I don't know how many folks have heard about Jaime Baptiste, who was putting his name forward too, to in the running for leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada. And he's Mi'kmaq from the Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia, I do believe. And I remember hearing him speaking about one of the barriers that came into play for him after he won. So he won his seat. And then when he won, I don't know what the details behind the scenes and how this got instigated, but Elections Canada changed the boundaries of his riding. So his First Nation that he's a member of, because it was his First Nation that swayed the vote, now they're no longer in his riding. So that's really problematic and a barrier that we face all the time. And you're right, where we have to go is critical. Nobody, like, there's so many people that don't want to go into a church, or we definitely don't want to have people over our shoulders. Like, that's not even legal, I don't think, Smarshy, for somebody to be over your shoulder while you're
no,
voting.
and it's not. And it was this church lady, and I honestly don't think my ballot even made it to the fucking or made it to the box. Like I mean, I know I put it in there, but I mean the bigger box when they counted it, right? So
Yeah.
I feel very defeated by that.
And so even this, like, maybe, and because I wasn't with you, so I don't know the circumstances, and like you said, you're not sure. But this just speaks to me to the mistrust that we Indigenous people have for government, and rightfully so, and these processes, and they're so colonial and been imposed on us for so long that, and we never see the outcomes in our favor, and makes it again feel, added to that lack of trust that we have. But if we're good with Vic, I'm going to move over to James Cosgrove, my friend. How are you? I haven't seen you for some time. Thank you for joining us today.
You bet, and thank you for having me. Myself, I'm James Cosgrove. I'm part of Whitefish River First Nation, Ojibwe, which is part of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, and my reserve is part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty on Birch Island, just north of Manitoulin Island. So I saw your live, and I started listening to it, and I'd like to, get involved, right? Especially when it comes to talking with politics, with Indigenous people, getting out to vote, and making our voices heard. Because the way I feel, the only way we can see any meaningful change in a system that has kind of overtaken and imposed themselves on us is to get into that system and try and make our voices count. Myself, I'm an Indigenous business owner, and my whole premise behind my business was to engage with Indigenous communities so that they can engage in business opportunities and work where people have historically been excluded. And, my business model has struggled quite a bit with not just connecting with communities, but with connecting with different industries as well. But I'm still here. We're still going. And right now I'm in Sarnia, Ontario, and we have some contracts coming up. And slowly but surely, we're making some changes here.
That's excellent. And so, James, I'm curious, in your community, how is voter turnout?
Voter turnout. Well, my community is far north from where I am, but voter turnout isn't always the greatest. And the communities I live around down in southern Ontario, with there's Kettle Point, Omshanon, and a few other ones. The voter turnout is okay, but again, um, again, going to from rural Alberta, and I lived out there, and I've experienced some of the racism and other things that are out there. It's so much more pronounced than down here, I find. But is it still here? 100%. And again, I do hear people saying about being uncomfortable about going to areas. And I do believe that there are some polling stations now that have opened up on one of the reserves down here, so people can be in their communities to make their voices heard.
That's really excellent. And I'm glad that, Marcia, I'm glad you brought this up about polling stations. And maybe this is something that we as Indigenous people need to do is reach out to Elections Canada and have conversations with them about ensuring that we have safe access to voting. Because if we don't feel safe in the community that we have to go and vote in, then it might be a deterrent. Like even for my husband and I, where our polling station is in a small town here in Alberta that is becoming more diverse because there's been some immigration happening, and the people are moving into smaller towns. But when we first moved out here, it was a town that was not very receptive of seeing folks that look like us coming to town.
Right. And it was just a thought I had because, like, I know that we want to get so many of the Indigenous people to vote the right way. And like we said before, you and I have had conversations in private. We've said that we can't tell them who to vote for. We can only give them the information that we have. And
Absolutely.
the one thing that it goes back and forth in my brain is where do we allow our indigenous people, even if it was at a school, that would be better, but they're designating the ones here to churches only. If you live in a certain area of the city I live in, it's a church, and I don't feel
Mhm.
comfortable going into a church because I don't want to have voted and then take my vote and make it not, not count, right? I want my vote to count. I
Yeah.
want to say I voted properly. But that's just a thing that I thought would be a good idea to talk about as well.
Absolutely. So I think I just wanted to make a note here. Curtis, I saw you join, but we're going to go because there's folks were here before. I'll move to Progressive Moose and then we'll come back to you. But one thing to keep in mind if we're having conversations with government officials or government departments and agencies or organizations like Elections Canada, remind them of their role in reconciliation. So, they have a role to play, and sometimes we have to remind them of it, but it's a good way to motivate those different approaches and motivate them to hear things from our perspectives. So always try to link back to reconciliation and the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So let's go over to Progressive Moose and then we'll come back to Curtis, okay?
Hey everyone. So just to start off, I mean, I will fully admit I am pale as hell. I'm a ginger, so I mean, no, no, nothing there. But I would like to also quickly just side note here, James. I am in your backyard, so to speak. I am just down the road at the intersection of Highway 17 and 6. You know where that is. So it's great to have somebody else from the north and hear that. Yeah, I just wanted to add. a lot of things that we've seen outside of Indigenous issues as well kind of feeds into the Indigenous issues. And for an example, I believe it was Calgary that had massive issues with their water systems. They had to dig up a crap ton of their stuff, yada, yada, yada. Now, I bring that up to point out, like, look how fast that was dealt with, right?
Yeah.
And Jagmeet Singh covered this quite a while ago. I don't have date specifically. I apologize for that. But essentially said, why is it when it comes to that, you have the indigenous communities that have been, for lack of a better word, screaming for clean drinking water and clean water to do everything they need to do. But yet, when you have a metropolis like that, it's done within days. I realize the numbers, but it should be the same across the board. And I think it's issues like that, as well as like we see with the AFN, with the child welfare discussion right now, um, where it's very important that our Indigenous brothers and sisters get out and vote and have their voice be heard. Because unless they do so, I mean, we're going to be dealing with the same issues where, unfortunately, you know, again, and I hate to say it this way, but the issues will get pushed to the side, and it's time for us to all speak up. Even those of us that aren't Indigenous and that don't face those issues, we need to be standing here right beside you guys, screaming just as loud, because at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all deserve the same basic necessities and quality of life across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, because Indigenous rights are human rights. And when a government can disregard the rights of one group, it's not long until they try to disregard the rights of all. And so we haven't been letting them get away with it. I'm sure everybody is aware that there's a lot of litigation happening in Canada with from First Nations and Métis alike and the Inuit, and oftentimes we are successful in that litigation. Not every aspect of it may be awarded to us, but I appreciate that there's acknowledgement that all of these issues apply across the board. And you're so right with that Calgary situation. Of course, there's 1.4 million people there that were impacted by their water circumstance. I find it a little interesting that a city that big didn't weren't keeping up with their infrastructure O&M, that they had these issues to begin with. But
But
um,
this falls into the category when I said that 70% of our water is gone. Like the ONG gas people are using all our all our water to fund their whatever they're doing, and that's where our water's going. I'll have to get
100%.
back with the numbers.
I
So yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, Vic.
No, I remember that interview that Jagmeet Singh, and the conversation was revolving clean drinking water for communities, and and it was a reporter that asked Jagmeet, like, well, you do recognize that that's a pretty very expensive undertaking, and he turned to the reporter, and go, would you ask me that same question if we were talking about Montreal? Would you ask me that same question if we were talking about Toronto or
Yeah.
Vancouver, right? And then it's like, and that's the perspective that Canadians need to understand. It's not about the cost; it's about what people's human rights are. Water is the most basic human need.
It's also about color of their skin too, so don't forget that.
Yeah, I think that's what Vic was getting at. And you're
Yeah,
right. Like, we all need water. None of us survive without water. None of
correct,
us.
correct.
So, and it is a complicated issue. I also did a video on addressing the water situation on reserve, and it's not without its challenges. And this reminds me, like, something I did want to talk about too, is what's at risk with this next election. And um, so much good has started but not finished, right? Like, the problem with, or the complexities of the indigenous issues, is that some of these issues, like water, child and family services, health, education, some of these things have been ignored or underfunded and undervalued for so long that the complexities to involved in trying to address them take years. You don't see it in one term or two terms even. You might, it could take decades to start seeing some of the good impacts. We're still dealing with the outcomes of policy and laws that were written in the 1800s that were imposed upon Indigenous people in this country. So to think that we're going to fix and resolve some of those things in a couple of terms of one leader is probably not going to happen. But okay, so Progressive Moose, are you good? And we'll move on to Curtis, or did you have anything more you wanted to add?
No, that's pretty well it. I mean, just like Vic said, and I thank you, Vic, for having more of the details on that Jagmeet Singh comment because I couldn't remember specifics, but that's fantastic. And guys, I just think at this point, again, it unfortunately it does boil down to the color of the skin when it shouldn't, and it's one of those things. Being from the north, I mean, I'm in a small town, and you can absolutely see the bias within the general public and the more localized governments, so municipalities and such as well. So it's not just a matter of on the federal level or provincial. It's baked right down to the bottom levels. So keep that in mind and just make sure when it comes to, like right now in Ontario, we're looking at a provincial election that Doug Ford's calling, as well. Like you said, the federal election, which is going to be astronomical and very massive in terms of how we deal with treaty issues and deal with Indigenous issues moving forward. Either side at this point, I will say, isn't innocent nor are they guilty, but they definitely need to put more attention on, regardless of who's in charge, and finally deal with the massive issues that nobody has dealt with up until now. And let's move forward for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very well said. And, not just the racism, there's an added layer to this besides being people of color. The constitutionality of our rights also causes a level of racism because there is a concept called the duty to consult. And that means because we have rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, and those rights are tied to land and specific resources such as medicines or moose or fish or, whatever it is that's important to a specific First Nation, Métis, or Inuit that might be in an area that's being proposed for resource development, we have to be, by law, talked to and consulted. And the proponent, along with the Crown, must ensure that that project is going to, number one, ideally avoid the impacts to rights. When you can't avoid it, then you'll mitigate that impact to rights. And when that can't happen, then it's compensation. And there's people who work in this world who kind of hear about, oh, you guys are getting equity, you're getting all these jobs promised to you, you're getting all these concessions that are separate from other stakeholders. And it's because we're rights holders, which brings a different layer of the discussion. And people feel threatened by this, I think, and see us as problematic and standing in the way of their livelihoods, which is really quite ironic to me because our livelihoods, which are tied to land, have been taken from us too. But I'll leave it at that, and we'll go to Curtis. And I welcome you, Pixie. We'll get to you after Curtis, okay? So Curtis, my friend, take it away. Let us know what you're thinking.
Hello, Tanse. I'm Northern Alberta. I'm Cree. I'm not sure, where are you from? What tribe?
I'm in Treaty 6 territory. I'm registered to the Black River First Nation, Manitoba, but
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think I'm registered properly. I think like my Chapon, my great grandmother is from Little Black Bear in Saskatchewan, but I was born and raised in Calgary and grew up in
Oh,
Alberta
okay.
all my life.
I love Calgary. You can see the mountains from there. I like going there to Banff all the time and
Yeah.
great stuff. But anyways, James, I'm like the Huron Robinson Treaty. That's amazing that they got that. With the $4 up to like they won in court with the billions there. And I think every treaty in Canada won from 11, or any treaty that's been made. Like my treaty, I come from Treaty 8. We did it in 1899, and the government has left it at $5 since then. It's kind of like they give that every year. They come out and give the $5, and they've literally taken out trillions. I'm not even joking, trillions in northern Alberta. It's the economic hub of this country with the oil and the gas and every other resource they've been taking out of here. And as First Nations, they're taking on our lands, and we don't see the benefits of that for most time. There are some First Nations who do benefit off of it. Depends on the area. Like some bands do benefit off oil and gas, and But the vast majority are what they call crown lands, and we get very the government takes most of it in their taxes, and that's what funds the Alberta government. That's how they can have billions of dollars in surplus every year. It's from our resources, and so that's kind of like what's going on. And now the Conservatives are coming in, and we've as First Nations, we've dealt with all these parties in the past. The Conservatives, we've fought the white paper with the red paper. We've been through this before, and in '69, and we've been through all Harper and all his assimilation policies, and now Pierre Poilievre's coming up, and he went to the Assembly of First Nations, and he's saying, "Oh, if you guys vote for me, you guys can have your own little tax, and you can make all your wealth and all this money, and you'll do great, eh?" And so that's kind of like the thing now is economic development. They want us to get on board and get rich and be wealthy. That's the new push. And that's what I see going on. That's their idea that they're pushing, economic.
Absolutely, I agree, and I heard it too. He said what his government wants to offer is equity, revenue sharing, all of that, but not one mention of protecting land or even reclaiming and restoring lands that have been previously developed. Like, he blatantly ignores how our rights are directly connected to land. And you can offer us all the jobs and revenue sharing and equity you want. But if we don't have lands to practice rights, then we're still being assimilated and colonized.
Right.
So, sorry, like here in Manitoba, just so people know, Wob Canoe has made an initiative with Manitoba Hydro where we want to increase our hydro production. So if he's given any Indigenous community and the Métis 51% ownership of any wind farm that they want to build. And of
You
course, there's
know,
government funding and all that. So, but that's in conjunction on their own lands. They get to dictate what goes there. It's under their terms and their conditions. And I thought it was a brilliant idea to help, because there's some communities that have really no way to have electricity unless through generators and whatnot. They can structure their own wind turbines and actually have their own electricity. And if they can sell it back into the grid, they'll make money for the community as well. Again, a brilliant idea on his part. But sorry, I
it,
just
No, that's great. Thank you, Vic. Go ahead, Smarshy.
I don't think people get it. And I don't know how many more times I can say this. To help the climate change reverse itself and for Mother Earth to go back to the way it was before the colonization period started, that is what we need to do. We need to give the land back so that we can help it flourish and make Mother Nature, Mother Earth come alive. Because right now she's crying
Yeah.
and she doesn't know where she's going or whether she's going to make it. So if we continue to allow these people to trample on this land, that's what our Earth is not going to be Earth anymore, and we're all going to cease to exist.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't disagree. Curtis, before we move on to Pixie, I wanted to let you know that Chiniki First Nation, I'm pretty sure it's Chiniki, they've also filed a case stating that our $5 treaty money for Treaty 6, 7, and 8
Heard
is
that.
not
That's
adequate.
awesome. Yeah.
So hopefully that's coming to Alberta too.
Yeah.
Did
Hopefully,
you?
Treaty 8 jumps on board, and
Yeah.
as it just yeah, it's great because that's one thing that needs to be solved. Like, but every time we go to the Supreme Court, we always file it. We always win, and we're always going to keep on winning because and yeah. So that's how I see it.
Awesome. Yeah,
Well,
we,
may I say one thing?
sorry, James, go ahead.
I was just going to say, going along with the treaty monies and that, and with the Robinson Huron, their victory in court, right? That was a $10 billion, and that was just the back pay coming for what they owe, and the back pay of $10 billion is a far cry from what it should be if you take a look at how the original treaty was written. And this is so monumental within First Nations because a lot of the different treaties, the number of treaties were based off of the Robinson Huron, the Robinson Superior treaties, and a lot of that same wording was put into those treaties. And it was won in the Supreme Court saying that the government of Canada was not did not uphold to what they were supposed to do to increase these payments going out. And I see in the future that a lot of different First Nations from a lot of different treaty areas are going to be able to use that as case law moving forward to get some compensation. And, I say some compensation. It's not everything that the First Nation should get. It's something that they can, win in court. Since I'm talking now, I'll just touch a bit on the water issue. One thing I heard, there's a First Nation down in Ontario, Southern Ontario. There's 2 municipalities on either side of it. Does not have clean drinking water. And I keep hearing the argument that the municipal government says it's a federal government issue because you administer to First Nations. The federal government says, well, you're a municipality, you should be providing them water, and it's back and forth arguing without even including the First Nation there. And it's a lot of this bureaucratic red tape that's preventing anything from getting done. And it's so frustrating to see that and to hear people complain about it when it's a problem that's on paper for some of these communities because of this red tape, and this part of the government doesn't want to fix it because they don't have the budget for it, and they put it to the municipalities, and the municipalities don't have the budget for it, so they go to the province, and we're just playing past the buck game, and that's despicable.
Yeah, and I've seen this too. Like the one thing in Canada is the provinces control access to the resources. So water is a resource. And so most provinces have their own legislation. Here in Alberta, we have the Water Act, which the province of Alberta uses to administer water licenses, water diversions, any type of activity around water. And so if that's one layer, then the municipalities have the infrastructure to move water around, which oftentimes excludes any local First Nations. So we end up in those situations like you just raised, where you have municipalities that are adjacent to First Nations reserve lands that they have water, but the First Nation doesn't because nobody considered them when they were building the infrastructure long ago. And now they don't have the adequate funding through their transfer agreements from the provinces to the municipalities to address that gap. So this reminds me, because I do want to talk about what's at risk with the coming election. And one thing that is at risk is closing this gap. And we'll talk about that some more, but I do want to pass the floor over to Pixie Lee because she's joined our group and I would love to give her a chance to tell us what she's here to talk about. Take it away, Pixie.
Oh, I was invited in and I really didn't know what I was supposed to be talking about.
That's okay.
Just talk about
I'm glad you invited me in, actually, because, listening to all of you, and I'll, full disclosure, I am a white woman married to a Cree man, and we have a son together, and I see the discrimination quite freely as I walk through a mall or something with my family, and it just disgusts me. Like I've often said to Shmarchi too, she knows this, that we should, and I say we, but because as far as I'm concerned, I'm still a colonizer, whether I'm married to an Indigenous man or not. My family came over when we shouldn't have. Quite frankly, we should have assimilated with the First Nations people. I think our society would be a lot better if we all had learned to live the same way with the land that the First Nations people did. So that's just and again with the water, and again, full disclosure, I'm a Liberal, and I think that Prime Minister Trudeau has done more for the First Nations people than any other Prime Minister in history. And I've been involved for a long time, and it's not perfect by any stretch. There's a lot more work to be done, tons more work to be done. Like we're just getting the scratch of the surface to be restarted to be done. And that's why I'd like to see us continue doing that work. But he also exonerated Poundmaker, and I don't hear a lot of people, especially First Nations people, speak of that. But that was a huge thing for my husband's band, because they're from Mistawassis, he's Cree, and Poundmaker was the first, nation's chief that they had never, that was the first time that a prime minister had shook his hand since 1800, when the treaties were first signed, right? And they hung him. So again, he was exonerated because they actually fought so long for that, and it came to fruition with Trudeau. So again, that's something that really made a difference for some First Nations people, not all, and everybody has different perception on everything. And I often say that even with us, we all have different perceptions, and we all have to learn. But again, speaking over First Nations people is not our place. We need to sit, learn. Reconciliation is speaking the truth first and foremost, and that's it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, because this totally was a good segue into what I did want to talk about next, and that is what's at risk. And I didn't know about pound makers, so thank you for that, because I'm pretty sure they did exonerate Louis Real as well, these are great wins. And I agree, full disclosure though, to everybody in the room, I too am a member of the Liberal Party of Canada. I do this strategically. It may not always align with my values. I'm probably a little more left leaning. When I did that whole where do you fall in the political spectrum test, I'm definitely very much left leaning. But I've worked in political circles my whole career. I've worked for the federal government, and I know the opportunity of being a member of a party like this, where you can actually come to the table, draft policy for their consideration, and participate in different committees and things. So I'm very strategic in the way that I participate. But one thing I want to share, and I can share some things that I am working on that were funded now and came out of the UN-DEC Act, so the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which was enacted on June 21st, 2021 by the Liberal government. This laid the foundation for a lot of really good work. Out of that legislation came an opportunity for the Métis, the First Nations, and the Inuit people in Canada to work with the government of Canada to develop an action plan. So there was 181 action items that come out of this legislation, and one of them is a concept called, or it's actually a regulation called the Indigenous Ministerial Arrangements Regulations. And what this means is that the government of Canada can now delegate regulatory authority to some First Nations, Métis, or Inuit governments. So depending on the project, where and the scope, they could have the authority to approve or decline or deny a project, potentially. It's yet to be tested, but this is at risk. I doubt, and I have no confidence that Mr. Polyev would want to continue on with this. He talks all the time about getting rid of red tape and gatekeepers, and that's just another layer of I don't want to say it's another layer of regulatory. It is removing Canada from the regulatory and delegating the authority to that Indigenous group, but it's yet, like I said, yet to be tried. There's also other work going on with the Canada Energy Regulator called the Indigenous Oversight Forum. And what that organization and group of people are doing is working on what is being called a mechanism, and this includes 117 First Nations and Métis from Northeast BC, Alberta, and into Saskatchewan. And it comes out of a hearing commit or a hearing condition for an NGTL project here in Alberta, where the First Nations and the Métis consistently kept saying and raising to the Canada Energy Regulator, we want to have regulatory oversight. So they were seeking an opportunity to play a role in monitoring for compliance to environmental standards, compliance to conditions, compliance to whatever the commitment that the company makes to make their project more environmentally sound and to make their project less impactful to the Indigenous rights. So this is actually underway. It's been underway now for a couple of years. And some of the challenge with a lot of this work is when you have 117 First Nations and Métis coming around the same table, it takes quite some time and a lot of effort to try to sort through those discussions, find consensus, find common ground, and work together on a common goal. And this could evolve into an Indigenous regulator, but it's 100% collaborative. The Canada Energy Regulator is doing this directly with First Nations and Métis all around the same table together, writing documents together, writing process together. And these things are at risk now if we have a change in government. Smarshy, I see you have your hand up.
Kind of talking, my mic is muted. Some dude in the comments needs to go because he's being very, very ignorant in the comments. I don't know if Moose got rid of him, but he's
Okay.
not allowed back here.
I'm not sure how to get rid of people. Let me see if I can figure that out.
Yeah, he's
I'd be
making some
happy to do
racist
it.
comments.
Yeah, he's making some very racist comments that Canada was built on European culture.
Yeah.
Just asinine conversation
And his
pieces.
name is Some Dude?
Yeah.
Some dude in Canada.
Oh, there we are.
I I would just block him, to be honest.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I found
Go to
him.
his go to his name.
There we go. I got him. Out you
Thank
go.
you.
Okay, he's gone.
Thank you for inviting me up, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Okay, we got a couple new folks up. Um, let's start with how it's what your name starts with a Z. I don't want to say it
Yeah,
incorrectly, but
it depends on the dialect that you're from. But most people just pronounce it as ZB.
Kate, go ahead, ZB. The floor is yours.
Okay, I wanted to touch on some dude's comment, which I know somebody saw me like reaming him out when he said that we belong in headdresses and not Nikes, because I feel the need to address this for other people in the room. When you say things like that, you are keeping us as this 1800s imagery Indian in your head. Instead of us progressing and growing in time, it's like saying that we lack the capacity to grow our own civilization. Whether or not that is impacted by Europeans and colonization, we still have the capacity to, grow in our own ways and customs as well. And that's something that with UNDRIP really irritated me because background, I am a crim student. While I am not in school right now, that is what I have been studying for the past 4 years. I have studied criminology, criminal law, indigenous studies, and sociology. So this is where I might rant for a bit.
Rant
It's not so
away.
much. It's not so much ranting, but it's talking about how this is all intricated and it is something that keeps us hindered and down. And legislation like UNDRIP is something that is meant to keep us in the past, because in that document it talks about we can only do things that create business for ourselves if we have the tools prior to contact. Girl, that's 500 years ago. Like, why are we the only ones that get to be kept back in that time?
Where
Right?
which section of the act is that?
It's on my laptop, so I can't.
Okay.
My MacBook is a little bit temperamental right now, but we talked about that in class extensively because we had a lawyer from the UN come in and we talked about how they would be implementing UNDRIP, because here's the thing, when it comes to implementing those kinds of things, we are not allowed, quote unquote, things like that are not allowed to undermine the sovereignty of the nation which we have ties with, is
Yeah.
a way to explain it.
Yeah.
So we cannot undermine the economy of Canada through that.
You're
Well,
right.
yeah, which I mean, I have words and thoughts about that.
I don't I'm not trying to, I don't want to defend Canada in any way through this, that there are, because we do have the treaties, right? So there's a
Yeah.
treaty that does give Canada their place, and of course they have done, I'm yet to see, I've been working in Indigenous Matters now for 28 years, and I'm yet to see any perfect legislation or perfect policy, because we know that it's mostly all designed to meet the needs of Canadians, and we are the small minority, right? We are a minority, and so that struggle. It's really hard for Canada to strike a balance when they have to. Their main goal, first and foremost, is to look after the interests of Canadians, and when we, as Indigenous people, too, don't identify as Canadians, which many don't, and I don't judge that at all. I try to be both. I personally, for me, I'm Canadian. I'm also Indigenous. I identify as Métis and First Nation. But all of this is so complicated. And I understand where you're coming from, ZB, and I don't disagree with you. What my concern is it's better than what we had. And I've even heard from elders and folks that participated in the negotiations and the discussions around the UN deck itself, that it didn't go as well as they had wanted. Like there were talks about making giving ice personhood for the Inuit, and giving the jungles personhood for the folks that live in the Amazon and things, and that was all left out of the UN deck. So all of these colonial constructs have their problems, right? And thank you for bringing that up, because it is completely true. My perspective is, though, it comes, these are ways in which the doors are open, even if it's slightly open, and we can start kicking them in. But if we don't have those opportunities presented some way, then we're still sitting on the sidelines, or we're sitting out on protest lines and, trying to be heard. But that's just
Yes.
my perspective.
No, I absolutely hear and understand what you're saying. Because of where I am, there's not a lot of native representation where I am, which is actually really weird because I am within I think I'm probably within maybe an hour of 3 different reserves.
Wow.
Right. And when you go into academia, especially out here, there's not a lot of native kids in class. So there was mostly white teachers talking about us and educating us on our issues. And there's so many times that I had to intersect and be like, hey, just so you all know, you're talking about people.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
And
I was the
I
opposite,
feel
Zibby.
I
So
I
I was the
feel
opposite, Zibby. Just on the opposite spectrum of you. I grew up 5 minutes from a reservation, and unfortunately, I know it's a tough topic for a lot of natives. I grew up near the reserve that was last closed in Shubenacadie. I went to school with the last batch of kids after that happens, and I learned a lot growing up with them.
That's awesome.
Appreciate it, because 2 words you probably will recognize: Boat Harbor in Nova Scotia. I lived near that, and I saw their fight and their struggle with that for, God,
Wow.
30 years until they finally won that fight with, who was the chief? Anna Paul, I think it was?
Is that the First Nation that had the pulp and paper mill
Yep.
before? Yeah. I
What won
remember.
it for them was one of the main lines burst underneath the main road outside of the reserve, and they tried to hide it real quick, but of course, me and my friends coming home on the bus, we spotted it and being loudmouths posted it all over Facebook. They couldn't hide it nowhere. Got the bus driver to stop, and we blocked off the RCMP from getting in there, and the First Nations get in there first and got to set up their little blockade and got national news because of it. That's what started the whole ball rolling for that, and I'm so glad we did.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank
Andrea
you
Paul,
for that.
yes.
That's like the tail pondings leak that happened up north by Fort McMurray. They didn't want to
Yep,
say
of
anything.
course.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Um,
okay.
The
Well,
conservative government hiding it over and over again and trying to hand off money, and I think Andrea turned down 4 separate payoffs, trying to get her to just leave it alone.
Well, that's their bread and butter, right? And they're always going to try and protect that.
yeah, and it's unfortunate, like so many folks that are motivated to cover up things like that want access to resources, they take advantage of our circumstances when, especially on reserve, when we're constantly, facing crisis. We have loss in our community more than any others. Like how many of us go to more funerals than weddings? And
I just went
we're
for one.
managing poverty, and they take advantage of that, and they come to the table with what feels like a lot of money, but when they're coming to the table with millions, that means that they got billions at stake. So
right.
yeah, I just want to make sure, ZB, that you've said everything you want to, and then we can also, Sam, I'm not sure if you had an opportunity yet to bring up anything specifically that you want to, and then we'll go to the real native. So ZB,
oh,
did you want more
yeah,
to add?
what I wanted to get at is the fact that your education, when it's coming from a white person, is going to have a different perspective. And when we talk
Mm-hmm.
sovereignty, because this is where I was going with my thoughts before I got derailed, is how disheartening it is when it's coming from white professors or a mob of white students telling you that you are never going to have sovereignty and that there's no hope for our people.
Yeah.
In comparison to when I go home to Treaty 6 in Edmonton,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a complete turnaround of them being like, you need to come back to school so you can actually be a student and not have to teach everybody.
Right.
Because we are going to support you because we create the curriculum around us because of the fact that obviously in Edmonton there's I think 4 different nations that are so close by Edmonton
Yeah.
off the top of my head.
Enoch,
Yeah.
Alexander, Alexis, and Musquecheese.
4 Musketeers. There's at least 7.
Seven.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like
Crawdad.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I took an Indigenous course because everyone's like, oh, go to the college in Medicine Hat. It's so good. No, because it wasn't Indigenous based and it wasn't Indigenous led.
Yeah.
They were touching on some subjects, but they weren't touching on anything. And I'm like, I'm not going to that college for that reason. So I went
Yeah.
to U of A and I went to a Indigenous led study group and I went to an Indigenous led course. And that was like the best move I've ever made.
That's excellent.
I will tell you that if you are thinking about going back to school, U of A is trying to develop a Indigenous crim program, which I think is funny because I asked for that 2 years ago, and they
Yeah.
are trying to recruit students for their program as an
Honey,
heads up.
So
yeah.
this is interesting that you say this, ZB, because I'm an alum from University of Alberta. I was the first Indigenous woman to graduate from the U of A with a biology degree. So now that you bring this up, so Western science is actually, my area and not traditional knowledge because I didn't grow up with my indigeneity. My father struggled from assimilation and self shame and all of those great things that come with colonization. So I think he protected me from my indigeneity and really just raised me to live a white life in a way, but you can't hide from your identity or run from it. So it catches up to you. And my career started working with First Nations. I started my career was then Indian Affairs, now Indigenous Services.
So you
And
probably
through
worked with my dad.
Yep, I did. And so through that work, though, I have gained to understand who I am and now I look at things in a very different way. I don't really rely on that Western science. So I'm really happy that you brought this up. And it's funny because I too approached the U of A about 5 years ago or so about doing some land based teachings and how they could start working that into their science programs. And they actually went and got an NSERC grant to do it. And I was part of the early kind of discussions about it, but that moved forward without my participation. I'm hopeful though that they did. They were able to find other Indigenous people to take part in that. But I see that Sam I am, but he's done. ZB, are you have you said everything that you wanted to share, or did you
Uh,
want to add some more?
no, I could keep talking about this forever. My people are my special interest because that is self-love. Right? Like when we advocate for one another, that is self-love. That's why I can talk about this forever because that's what I spend my time doing is researching our political activists, our traditional laws, like everything. That's my special interest. But I will share the floor.
Well, thank you. And I
ZB,
appreciate your
yeah.
time because you're the generation that's going to be taking care of me when I'm an elder. So thank you so much for that self-love and then for the love of our people. Kay, real native, the floor is yours, my friend.
I was just gonna say, ZB, if you're associated with Enoch, my mother is the great granddaughter of Chief Enoch. But yeah, my father traveled to China, Germany, Switzerland, New York. When UNDRIP was being brought in, my father was traveling, hoping that they would do it the right way. And in some ways, it turns out they didn't follow what the chiefs were asking when they went to speak for UNDRIP. Karma, Pat. Aho.
I've heard this too.
Mhm.
That there were things that were left out that really were critical pieces, and it sounds to me now, because I wasn't there, but from what I've heard from folks that were, that the colonial machine denied some of what folks wanted to have included in the UN deck. I'm pretty sure my uncle was a party to those conversations too, because he was in Geneva, New York, and
Mhm.
my uncle was Harry Daniels, and he
Oh yes,
negotiated the inclusion of
yes.
Métis in Section
I
35.
heard that name quite a bit when my dad was traveling, and yeah, they went to Geneva together. They went to China.
Yep.
They went to a few countries other than just the three. There's some that I'm missing.
Yeah, they went all over, and because they had talks everywhere with Indigenous people across the globe, and but like, those are the folks who laid the foundation for where we are today. They're the ones who also realized that this is a system that's been imposed upon us, but it's a system that isn't going away. So if we don't learn how to navigate within it and participate within it, then we get left out of it. And like I was saying early in the live, is that of all Canadians, Indigenous people are directly affected by government and government decisions every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. ZB, you were going to add something?
Okay,
And then
so I
Eris
did.
Bregu. Oh, sorry. Eris Bregu wants to come up, and he said he's got a short question for us.
Okay, I'll
But
get
he's
him.
got.
Okay. I did talk to Gary Metallic, and Gary Metallic also worked on UNDRIP. And what he told
Hello.
us was that the document that they all worked together was vastly different than the one that they got back from UNDRIP. And he was
That's right.
so disappointed in
Yeah.
what they got back from UNDRIP,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay,
And
can I ask you something,
Wait,
please?
one second. ZB was
Yep, we're
talking.
gonna take our turn. Okay,
um
Eris, we'll let ZB finish, and then we'll give the floor to you.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
and the other thing that I wanted to add was I'm from Ochis, like I'm a direct descendant of Ochis. I
Oh,
have I also come from Sunchild, and I am adopted at Saddle Lake. Although we do have
nice.
family from Saddle Lake.
I do have
Mm-hmm.
family from Saddle Lake.
My adopted family from Saddle Lake is the Shirt family. The last name that we have from Saddle Lake is Desjardins, which we got from an Indian
Oh.
agent
Right.
when we
Yeah,
were
that's
getting
in my
treaties.
family too.
The Desjardins family started in PSC's band in Lac La Biche. And when the PSC's band dispersed, the Desjardins were dispersed along with it.
Interesting. Wow.
Hello.
Okay. ZB, you're finished. We'll pass the floor to Eris, or okay.
Hello, ma'am. Thanks for letting me speak. Actually, what I want to tell you, because I love history and I love making some questions, in different issues. Actually, I respect the Indigenous Matters. Just, I want to ask you, not you, like, I'm talking about the Indigenous community. It's like, you think that the European colonization, or like in Canada or in US, for example, they had good things too? Because some people, they say, for example, before the European came, there was not a lot of technology or infrastructure. There was not like a well-built system that Canada has now. So are we going to speak, for example, also for the good things that Europeans, they brought to Canada? Or we're going to speak also only for the indigenous? Because, for example, I have friends and I discussed about this issue with them, and they told me, yeah, but in Canada, before Europeans came, it was a forest. Like, people, they were living with arch, they were living with stones. But then the Europeans, they built like infrastructure, they built the rail road,
Hey,
they built the schools,
Just,
they
I
brought
want
the
to
I need
answer
to
your
English.
I
Because
need to
now
question.
what
stop you right there,
language we
bud.
are speaking?
Okay.
We are speaking English, right? We are
we
speaking
need to
English.
stop you
So
right
the
there,
English
Dad.
came from where? It came from
We
Europeans. It
need to
didn't came
stop you
from.
right there. Can
Yeah.
someone mute him?
So
So, are we
You
talking
get
about the
my
diseases
question,
that they
right?
brought? Did
no,
you
we
mention?
do. We get your question. I'm going to put
Yeah,
you on mute for 2 seconds, okay?
yeah.
One thing
So,
to keep in mind is you are assuming that it feels like you're assuming our ancestors were uncivilized or in some form had no infrastructure, had, our language was rich. Our language is still rich, and we did have infrastructures. We had vast trade networks from Alaska all the way down into the South Americas. We had technologies of our own that maybe weren't based on resources such as minerals and metals, things like that. But we definitely used tools. I've heard things about our people worked maybe 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time was spent craft, like developing your art, doing community, practicing ceremony, raising children, spending time with family, living a good life. So I would argue that perhaps the colonizers would have had a better life had they adopted
we
our
uh,
ways.
we
But
weren't sick.
yeah, we weren't sick. That's a really
We
good
didn't
point.
have all the substances we have today, my dear. If
Um,
it wasn't for the European people, we had natural
Absolutely.
medicines.
And
Hmm.
I don't want to brush off what you're saying. Like, I think when you think about evolution on a planetary scale, humans have been evolving to develop new technologies, and it was probably likely bound to get here anyways in some way. The technologies that we have, and we too. I actually was just talking about this with my husband like last week or something. Like, I wonder where our people would be today in terms of their own technology development had we not had the newcomers come, because of course we would have continued to evolve our tools and our methods and our ways.
Hmm.
But how do we don't know where that would have gone because of the circumstances that we're in.
I would
Yeah.
like to add, um, there are so many things that European propaganda history has taught you that we didn't have complex things. In fact, the U.S. Constitution is based off the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You have
Hmm.
based our current laws off of our laws.
Yeah.
To sit here
Which
and
is
say that
odd.
we are not, like, we didn't have complex systems before contact is obscene. And I get that you may not have known this, um, because like I said, I study this. This is what I do with my time. Um, but these are the things that need to be talked about more often. Like, we had soap. Oh, I know that sounds stupid, but like, it was one of the primary things that when we made contact, we were getting like white people to bathe. And that was
Yeah,
part of their sickness and spreading diseases, is that they were not bathing properly. Like, and there are so many like other things besides bathing. Like, we had our own bridges, which, to say that we did not have complex things or built complex things prior to contact is a form of propaganda. I'm
and
gonna
and
say
to
that. Sorry.
and to say to add on to what ZB said, we taught the settlers, how to keep warm for the winter. If it wasn't for the first contact with indigenous people, y'all wouldn't know how to stay warm. We taught you how to fish, how to hunt, how to cook,
Yeah.
how to clean, like do all the things that you need to do to survive. And y'all brought blankets with diseases on them. Fire water. We never had fire water until you guys brought it here. There's just so many things that you guys brought here that has turned our world upside down to appease you guys. And I'm tired of appeasing the masses of settlers, because it's like, when do we matter?
Yeah.
When do our voice matter? That's what
Absolutely.
I'm tired
Thanks,
Yeah,
Marshy.
and just to add a bit more of a layer to that, I've sat and I've watched quite a bit that I can in terms of documentaries and just soaking in as much information as I can on this sort of stuff. And I can say, like, when it comes to trade alone, like, this whole conversation is relevant, of course, and it leads in to me. It makes me think of trade because all the indigenous nations already had
Hello, can
trade
I speak
agreements or
something?
routes set up with each other, and you can see where there are certain indigenous settlements that they have unearthed that show like they were trade hubs. That's exactly why they were created, was to bring different nations together to trade the things that they needed to trade with one another. So it goes along the same lines as everyone else is saying. It's like, you know what, we keep hearing all this. The Europeans brought this, the Europeans brought that, but a lot
Hello,
of the
can I
stuff that
tell
they claim
something
that they
about this
brought,
regarding?
they was already set up here on Turtle Island, and they didn't need the help of the Europeans for any of it. So, yeah,
Um,
sorry, that's my
What
rant.
did they contribute except for
No, what I
division?
wanted to tell about this, like, of course, everybody has their rights, but I think both indigenous and European rights are mutual. We cannot blame like one part and the other part we can say it's bad, because look, for example, we talk about the indigenous matters, but what about the Mongol Empire, for example? They did a lot of atrocities, but nobody like is
The
of
Mongolians have
people in Mongolia, for example, or in Arabic countries or in Europe is not having the rights to speak against the conqueror that they had before,
so
like in
what
Russia,
do the
for
We're
example.
Mongolians
not
have to do with
But
conquered.
us?
now the indigenous, at least they have the right to
Wow, you
speak
don't.
about this, right?
What do
My
the
And
dear,
the
we are
Mongolians
West,
not.
have to do with us?
Okay.
the
We
West
are not
itself,
conquered.
no, the West
You're not.
itself, it was
We are
created.
not conquered.
No, no,
Okay,
my
so
point is, lady, like for example, Canada itself as a system, it came from Europeans as a system, right? Because Canada is connected to UK even now. We pay tax to the Queen. Do you know that? We pay tax to the
yes.
Queen, right? So a lot of people they claim fake indigenous ancestry. You know about this too, right? That they claim that
Yes.
fake.
Yes, the
They
people
Where
give
is
do.
that?
no, I know some people here in Canada, they claim fake indigenous ancestry. And my point is,
Yes.
Europeans, they brought also good things in Canada. That's
Oh
a
my
fact.
god.
Okay.
Because, look, for example, I'll make you just
I'm
a
out.
simple question. If wouldn't be for Europeans, we would like to come to Canada? We would like to migrate to Canada? You have Mexico. You have Mexico. Does anybody likes to go to live in Mexico? But everybody wants to come to live to Canada. And Canada, the system
Mexico are
Mm.
our
that
Mexicans
we have
are
now,
our
it was
brothers
built
and
by
sisters.
Europeans. It was not built for other people, right? That's why we love to
Oh my
migrate here.
god.
That's why
Oh my
Okay.
god.
Mexicans are our brothers and sisters. They are
in
in fact
US too,
the
right? In US, not only in
Yes,
Canada. I'm
all
talking about
indigenous
US.
people go from the top of Canada to the bottom to the tip of Central America. That
No,
is
Canada
Turtle
has the
Island.
high migration rate in the world because of
Yes.
European
Okay.
system.
I can't. I
What
can't. I
and I
got
You get
wanted
my point.
I get your point, Eris.
Thank you.
And I don't think Eris means us any disrespect.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. That's all.
But
I'm not saying disrespecting about indigenous. Just I'm speaking
yeah.
at least indigenous. They can speak in their rights.
we
But
know
in
that, but
Russia,
we
they
know
cannot
that.
speak. In Russia, in Africa, they cannot speak. For example, in let's say Middle East, the people that say you have the gay community, you have the Jewish community, they cannot speak. But the indigenous, they can
uh
speak about their rights. Why?
Cut
Because
in for just a
Canada.
second.
Oh
I
You
just
wow.
want
get
to
my
say
That's
point. What I
something,
mean.
sir. Eris, can I speak for just a moment?
Thank you.
Yes, Indigenous people here can speak, but you're saying it like
Perfect.
it's some sort of privilege.
Yeah, that's
They should be
because in
honored by
Russia, for
it.
example, the
No,
people they
no,
cannot speak
cut
against the
Eris,
dictator.
please, please. This is a
Thank you.
talking stick. Please let me speak. They do not need to be grateful for basic human rights.
yeah.
They do
I
not need
might.
to be grateful for basic human rights. That's what I have to say.
No,
And telling them
just
that
my
they need to
question is,
suck it
ma'am,
up and
did
be
Europe? You think
grateful
Europeans they
is
bring
some
good things here?
bullshit.
They bring good things here. They bring good things.
No, they
Europeans.
bring a lot of
can,
shit here too. They did not need
You're
us.
speaking English to
We
me. We are all speaking English. English from where it came
Okay.
from.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to mute. And then Progressive Moose wanted to join the conversation. Smarty, I saw you too. I'm sorry, Eris. I'm going to mute you for a second. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to Progressive Moose.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I just want to add, as we currently speak, and I made a video about this earlier today. So yes, I realize we're talking about Canada, but we're talking about indigenous communities really across North America at this point. And I'd like to point out that given the policies and the executive orders that Donald Trump has put out. CNN has actually done a report that indigenous people in New Mexico are being stopped by the Border Patrol, by the ISIS, and all that jazz. They're being stopped and they're being asked for proof of citizenship. And I'm sorry for my language for this, but motherfuckers, it's their land. Okay, so if you want to sit there and say that they have quote unquote a privilege to speak, I'm sorry, but apparently that doesn't mean jack when you're being taken from your own land in North America that is yours by birthright.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry, that's all I had to add to the
No.
conversation.
And that's a great point. Thank you. And Eris, like I don't really get a sense from you that you mean us ill will. You just have a different perspective. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that you came to the table to have this conversation with us because it isn't, you know what, I've Mark Miller, who was the Minister of Indigenous Services at one time in CERNAC, even the Crown Indigenous Relations, he took it upon himself to learn an Indigenous language in this country as a leader of this country. And that to me shows that he understands his privilege here on these lands. And it would have been such a beautiful thing if more people would have learned our language. And many newcomers back in the, the 1700s and stuff did learn our languages. And we're learning to work with us. It was not until they really wanted greater access to more and more lands and more resources did they feel we were going to be in the way. Because when they started signing treaties and they had to acknowledge their obligations to us. So, Eris, I really appreciate that you came up to have a conversation with us. I don't think that the panel all agree with you. Yes, maybe in hindsight,
Yeah.
we've gained
Um,
some things, technology and other things that we might not have
Thanks for
had.
telling this,
what
Ben. What I want
but
to tell
what
you that we
Eris,
have
what
a lot of
you
good things from Europeans.
yeah,
That's
but what
The
let
Eris, what you
Europeans
forget,
got
the
good things from
TTC,
us.
the railroad system, the infrastructure, the
Railroad
buildings,
is Chinese built.
the
The
railroad was actually
healthcare,
the
money
human
we
that was
had to
rights,
have
appropriated from the
healthcare because you
the
indigenous.
guys
human
poisoned
rights that
us.
The
In Africa, in
railroad was
Russia, in
money
Middle East, they don't
appropriated
have.
from the indigenous
Okay.
people.
Canada became a Western country from Europeans. This is 1 + 1 is 2. That's
Okay,
a
wait.
fact.
I'm
It
gonna
became a
okay.
Western country
By the
from
way,
Europeans. That's it.
Hang
English was
on.
the first language.
Yeah, and okay, number one, we had healthcare. Our
Yeah,
Mhm.
healthcare was taken
we
from
have
us because
healthcare
that
here.
forest is our healthcare.
We have
CD,
healthcare. Yeah,
I see
CD,
you, CD.
can I say
And
something?
we have
yes, please.
human
I want to
rights
quote.
also.
Sorry, Eris, I gotta mute you. Go
I,
ahead, real native, and then I
I
see
want
you
to
too,
quote.
ZB.
I want to quote Chief Dan George.
Please.
He said, "When before the Europeans came, we had no criminals because if someone didn't have something, we gave him these things. If he didn't have a teepee, he gave him that. If he didn't have clothes, we gave it to him. Therefore, we had no criminals. We had no criminals. There was no need to lock our doors. We didn't have sickness. Therefore, our health care was minimal." He said, "We had our own spirituality. Therefore, religion was not needed to be forced." All of these things were forced on us by the Europeans when they arrived. Things we had and didn't need already.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. And I really think, Eris, that um
Again,
you've been
like English
taught
was
the
the first
wrong
language.
things. We really did. We suffered more than we benefited when the Europeans came here. ZB, go ahead, girl.
So I am 36. I have been through colonization. English is in fact my third language. I grew up speaking Cree and Anishinaabe with my grandmother, who could only speak one word in the English language. That's it. I grew up off the land up until I was apprehended by the government, which this language that I speak to you from right now is actually because they beat it into me.
A forced language.
It is my third language, and I cannot remember being able to speak Cree or Anishinaabe fluently because when I speak those languages, my nervous system goes into overdrive. This is a part of the reason why we are so sick. Because of the fact my nervous system has completely crashed out because of the abuse that I had to go through. Pause. Because this is how worked up I get when I talk about it. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because of the fact that this is creating, it has altered my genetics. This is, we talked about this in our health class about the reason why we have the epidemic of diabetes within Native communities actually comes from the stress of the trauma that we have gone through as genocide, because that's what you guys did, and that is currently what we are still living through. And I would like to point out that the word genocide actually has five parts to meet that criteria, which we currently still meet all four of them. Rather, four out of the
No, my
five.
point is you have Australia, right? You have New Zealand, you have
I
Canada,
have
you have
Australian
USA.
friends
Why the
who
highest
have all
migration
gone
rate
through
is
the
in these
same thing,
countries? Why
who will
people they
agree with me.
no listen? Why people they love to migrate in European ex-colonies countries? Why they don't like to migrate in Africa? Why they don't like to migrate in China? Why they go to Australia, New Zealand, USA, Canada? Because this system were created by Europeans. And that's why they
No.
are attractive for us, right? We love to migrate there because they built a good system.
What is your point though? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
What,
yes, you get my point, man. Because like
what
no, I
is your
don't
everybody
get
is
your
point?
complaining
point.
Well,
about
no, all
here.
these other countries that you're mentioning, they have indigenous populations that are
Who wants
going
to
through the
migrate in
exact same
Mexico?
thing under
Tell
the
me,
same
who
Me!
kind
wants
of
to migrate
system.
in
I'll go
Mexico?
to
Who wants to
Mexico.
migrate?
Me!
Who wants to migrate in Africa? Tell me. Who
I
wants to
would.
You
migrate
said
in
I'd love to see
China?
Africa.
In
indigenous.
China.
I'll go.
Tell me who wants to migrate in China. But
Actually,
I'm
China seems
everybody
like not a
like
bad
Canadian.
choice right now.
China
everybody
sounds
like to
good.
migrate in
Okay.
USA, in Canada, because the
Okay,
system
sir,
was built by
Eris,
Europeans.
Yeah.
sweetie, you're not making a really good point, and I really think that
No,
you're
that's a
you're taking up
fact. That's facts. I'm
unnecessary
Okay.
making
time.
facts.
Hang on, Eris. I'm going to mute you again. Sorry, sir. I don't mean you any disrespect. But those other countries you speak of were also settled by Europeans. So what you're saying, even Canada was settled by Europeans, yes, but it doesn't. Our history is similar to Australia's and New
Absolutely.
Zealand, and
Mm-hmm.
Africa was settled also by your
South Africa.
by some European country. Like so, I don't know what your point is exactly. People like Canada because Canada is
Mention
um,
South Africa, ma'am. South Africa is the richest country in Africa. Do you know this? And that it
I
was South
That
Africa.
doesn't mean
okay
it's more valuable. Like, is it
or
just about money? Like,
or
oh my
And
God.
desirable.
sorry,
So
guys, just quickly, the biggest thing, like the indigenous populations of the
People,
countries that
of course,
that you're
money matters. What are you talking about? Money is important. Like,
okay,
what are you
Money is
but
a
talking?
colonizer's
hold on.
construct,
currency.
yes. Okay,
Do you
So
work without money? I will make you a question. Do you work without money? No, I don't think so.
we
okay,
can't because it's imposed on
but
us.
again, that's a result of colonization, right? That's something I touched on before, where that was already something that the indigenous population had in place through trade with each other, right? They didn't need money because they traded what they needed with each other. And to get to my point as to why I'm talking right now, the fact is
No.
all the countries you're talking about. Hold on,
Yeah,
I'm not done.
Australia, New
I'm
Zealand.
not
Oh,
done. The
Don't talk
reason
over
why
me,
I'm
man.
talking is because all the countries that you have mentioned, their indigenous populations are also screaming at the top of their lungs because they're having the same issues that the indigenous populations in North America are having because of colonization, because of the system that's set up to oppress them and keep them where they
but the
are.
Europeans
This is the
westernized
issue.
them. Indigenous
Can I?
we're living in the Stone Age. You know that,
Can
right?
I?
We
We're
like
Can I?
living
it.
in
Can
the
I?
I
Stone
Can
was
I?
not
Age.
living
No,
in
no,
the Stone Age.
They were
Can I?
We
living in
like
the
where
Stone
we
Age.
were
Can I?
at.
Everybody
I was
knows
not
this.
living in the
You
Stone
you
Age.
mentioned
no,
you
no.
mentioned
Okay,
No,
Can
I
I?
was
okay,
not
Eric's
living in the
exhausting.
Stone
Hang on.
Age.
Hang on.
okay.
Can
We're
I
gonna
say
need a
something?
time for a second
Hello.
here. Yeah,
Can
Big
I? Can
Sky
I?
or Big Sexy Kev, you're new to the party, so I'll give the floor to you. Eris, I think we have finished our
I think we've heard
conversation.
enough from Eris.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I just like to acknowledge the Indigenous people in Canada. I'm an Indigenous man from Australia. I'm a First Nations Australian man. I'm a Mullingarpa Barkindji man. my lineage and bloodline goes for 80,000 years in this country, and we still practice it every day of our lives. English is my third language. I speak 3 Aboriginal languages. So when you say colonizing, we cannot adapt. No Indigenous persons around the world can
No,
adapt to
no, no.
Western
What
society.
people are
No,
talking
let
here
me
about?
talk. Let me talk.
I think we've heard
When
enough
it comes
from
to
Eric.
colonization,
If you want to drop him,
when
give
I
someone else a chance to come up.
when it comes to colonization, as an Indigenous man, we find it very hard to adapt to the Western society because we don't understand their laws, we don't understand their ways, and the greed of European, like the colonialism, and they bring it onto us and oppress our people. Like you're taking away everything from what we've had for thousands of years before you came here. Before they invaded our countries. Over here in Australia, as a First Nation Australian Indigenous man, we aren't even in the Constitution. We are known as animals, not people. We are fauna and flora. And that was proven in 2024 when they said no to a voice for the Indigenous people of my country, the Australians, the white Australians. This is the European Australians. They said, we don't want the Indigenous people of the real people of this land to have any say because it's too rich with all the stuff that they want.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we still live today in today's society as fauna and flora in my own country. And I always tell people say, are you Australia? You know what I'd say to people? I wasn't born in Australia. Australia was born in my country.
Yeah.
Right.
That's perfect. Wow, excellent. Yeah, lots of people agreeing with that one. Thank you for that.
Thank you for hearing me. I appreciate it, you guys, and I just love all Indigenous cultures, and I stand with all the Indigenous cultures around the world, especially First Nations people in Canada, First Nations people in America, First Nations people all over. We all share one thing. We all share stories. We all share culture, and that's all that matters, mate. And we need to keep that alive for our future generations.
Absolutely.
Kev, just before you go, out of curiosity, which tribe are you from in Australia?
So my mum. So I'll say it in my language, and then I'll explain it to you in English. So ngai namaka makwari kaliwanga, kamija baka jubilira, kilpara. So makwari kaliwanga is my mum. So I am from Maliangapa country, which is the desert, and my wind is the hot wind. So I'm from the north wind, and my dreaming, my totem is a dingo. My dad is a kilpara, which is the cold wind, and my dad is a bilira. He's a Barkinji. He belongs from a river, and his totem is the wedge-tailed eagle.
That is amazing. I love that.
Hi.
Yeah, so but I just want to say, like, and this is really going to sound really weird to you guys, okay? So I had my DNA done. Like, I wanted to see what was in me. I'm more Indigenous Australian than anything else. However, I do have a colonizing grandfather, but I also found out that with my DNA makeup, that I have 1.6 Inuit in me.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I just like, wow, where did that come from? So obviously I've got an ancestor that traveled somewhere.
Yeah.
No kidding.
So somewhere along the line, you had an ancestor that traveled from the north.
Well, I heard in history that some of those Inuit people are actually related to the Australian Aboriginal people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Actual theory. So there is a theory out there that states that because the coastal nations out in BC, they have similar like traditional tattoos and the same as the Inuit, that they actually were traveling back and forth and we were trading with Hawaiians and Polynesians. Right? There are stories out there. I'm not saying that those are true.
we
right? Well,
in
like,
Yeah, in Australia, like here in my country, so when you go to the tip of Australia, the far north, that's not like Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, Fiji, and through Asia. That they are all Melanesian or Melanesian people.
Okay.
Where I come from, we are not Melanesian. We're not South Pacific.
Uh,
We are the oldest continuous living culture on the planet. We still practice everything that we've been doing since our ancestors first came to this in this country here, which is 80,000 years ago, and we still do it today.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would ask your colonizers over there, cousin, to work on their dancing.
Sorry, the colonizers over here,
The
they are.
colonizers work on their
We
dancing.
have, and it's only very new to my country. I think it was 1994 or something, or maybe a little bit earlier. So they have what you call Australia Day, where people celebrate this country. But us Indigenous people, we don't like Australia Day because it doesn't celebrate how the country became one people. It celebrates how their ancestors came here and killed our people like they did your people, how they stole our kids like they stole your kids, how they took our land like they took your land. So we don't call it Australia Day, we call it Invasion Day.
Yep. We call it Colonizer Day.
We call it Invasion Day, and they hate
Yeah.
it. They hate Indigenous people telling the truth about the dark history of our country because they believe that Australia is the best perfect country, and it's not. The best perfect thing about Australia is how beautiful the Indigenous people are because you people are our family. You are Indigenous, so we aren't friends, we are family.
Awesome. Thank you, Kev.
Thank
Um,
you. Appreciate that.
no, well, thank you. I'm so glad you joined the conversation. And we do have someone, I'm not sure how to say your name. You're the TTHE. Did you want to add to the conversation and tell us how to say your name properly?
Yes. My name, how you say it, Dene, is Tatsonokina. Tatsonokina. That means metal, copper people. And they call us Tatsonokina because we traded copper in the past.
Wow.
And
Again, that demonstrates our, the infrastructure, the society that we had long before the newcomers came. But sorry to interrupt, carry on.
um, one of the movements, that has been happening in this country, Canada, um, is the movement to get out of this system. The only way we can gain our sovereignty and control back of our lands is to fire this government trusteeship. We are in a trusteeship from the 1800s, the late 1800s. And that was because under international law, no country can go into another country and start exploring and extracting without giving back. That's where the funds were set up, and it was put in a trust. And a lot of people don't realize that this Canadian government is set up, and it's a business corporation that catered to the trade, the economic trade that was happening back in the day, which was mainly fur. And then once they seen, their rich resources in our country, well, the history is there. And the takeover of these corporations, and every province and territory is economic borders that these traders claimed, because for many, many years there was always a conflict between the East and the West. And that had to do with the trade. Like the western side of Canada, that route was already established with the British and Columbia. And on the eastern side, right, that's where they were docking, all the ports were. So, when you start really digging into and doing research into how this system was set up, you know, um, as a survivor of every failed government policy in this country, I'm 69 years old. I survived residential school, 60s and 70s scoop, relocation, experimentation. Um, every policy that these governments, whether you're in the US or Canada, and it doesn't matter which country you live in, if the Commonwealth is there, then guaranteed the people are suffering. Okay? And it's a fact. And what they did here in this country to take over is, you know, what they took away, they replaced. So they took away our true identities as tribal people. Like the tribal name of my people is Setsanokina, and every tribe has their own tribal name and language and laws. This is why I always refer to the fact that we are tribal signatory people. We are not First Nations, we're not Indigenous, we are not Aboriginal. Those are terms of references that the government gave us, because that's what they use in the Indian Act. And, they took away our language and replaced it with the English language, which has now become a universal language. It doesn't matter which country you're in, that English language is there. So today I speak English very well. I also went to their universities to learn how to read and write and to become a journalist. Instead, my path took a different direction. Instead of writing, I'm now in what we call politics today, because the way I see it as a survivor is politics is a fight over our land and resources. If we had no land and resources, we would not have these issues in this country today. And how this Canadian government took over was through these corporations. And many people do not know this knowledge that Canada is incorporated under the United States government. We have a business number because the fur trade back in the day, when they wanted to create an entity, they couldn't incorporate themselves. So the United States agreed to have Canada incorporate their business. And this is why Trump can say Canada can become the 51st state. Okay, because we are incorporated under them.
But how does that work with our Constitution and us being a member of the Commonwealth and them being a republic?
So most of the people that I do talk to, majority say, and I feel the same way, that this Canadian Constitution is not our Constitution. Like, we have a Constitution in English, for example, in Dene. And in Dene, we call our Constitution Denich Ani, which means how to live a good life, how to walk a good path. And that's what the Canadian Constitution spells out, is how do the civilians live amongst each other. And we, as tribal people, signatory people, they push us into a forum, into a process called the Indian Act, Chief and Council system now, which our people have gotten so used to be under that when, we finally start seeing the truth, it's hard for the people to comprehend there's a big difference. And I travel across this country, doing talks and teaching this knowledge, because If knowledge is powerful, then the knowledge that we have, we need to share with one another so that we can empower our people, empower our women. From what I comprehend today, and as a clan mother, I was given the responsibility of a clan mother in 2012 in Clearwater, Saskatchewan by the Dene elders. And I was told that was the first in 200 years. But what the elders seen was that that title would would uh, would protect me and open doors, which it has. It has allowed me to go into forums and speak our truth. And that was one of the reasons why I joined the convoy, was because we needed to remind this country, the civilians, if you want justice in Canada, for example, then there's got to be justice for the tribal people first. And if this government is now enforcing all these mandates on you, then welcome to our world. Because, you know, instead of putting, well, they put us on reserves in these little parcels of land that's useless. But now, what are they doing? They're trying to create these districts. They don't call them reserves because the people go nuts. They call them districts. So if you want to go from example District 2 to District 58, they have to get permission. No different than our ancestors did. So you could see where they're now closing in on the civilians. So it's not like they've got it made either. Not until we get rid of this tyrannical government, this institution, which is only a business corporation. And this is how I'm sharing the knowledge to our people and to the civilians that, you know, if you don't like this institution, then it's time to create a new one, you know, and the lands revert back to the people, and you pay your taxes. If you want to pay taxes, then you pay it to your regional tribal offices, because if they're, you know, the way they have this treaty set out from 1 to 11, it also excludes a lot of other tribes. You know, like
Why?
the Northwest Territories was never ceded nor surrendered through a treaty, although today they're doing it through forms like cows and plows. If you accept the cows and plows, they have a clause in there that says that you cede, surrender all your Aboriginal rights and title as an individual and as a nation to the government in writ of the Queen. Back now, today is the King. So, you know, when you start looking at this system, and I always, the way I explain it, what went up can come down. And it's the people, the tribal people in this country that must stand up to premiers like Danielle Smith, who wants, you know, to make Alberta a sovereign nation. Well, how
She's the
could
worst
she?
form of people.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
a
So, yeah, but
horrible
how,
person.
yeah, so how could she make Alberta a sovereign nation
She
when
can't.
Harper could not get status for Canada as a sovereign state? In 2015, remember, he tried,
Yeah.
and they asked him,
Yeah,
"Do you have
absolutely.
title to the lands?" And he said no. So this is why Canada sits with the other 144 countries and are not sitting at the security table. That is sovereign countries.
I'm a Calgarian and I'm done with
Oh,
Smith.
oh, hang
Like,
on. Sorry, Angry Ginger. Their coral reef was here first.
okay.
So, and I'm trying to give everybody space and their time. So
Absolutely.
before you,
Real quick,
Oh,
could
shut up.
somebody answer one of the comments questions talking
sure.
about sovereignty and Canadian land? Because they've been waiting to have that question answered.
Okay, what was the I didn't. I'm having a hard time keeping track of the chat, the comments. So thanks, CB. What's the question directly?
Moni, I think is how you pronounce her name. I don't remember exactly how her question was worded.
Okay. I do see one. I heard the same thing about Edmonton. If you want to give us your question again, Moni. Yes, thank you. But I don't have to dig through the comments. Um, and then once we'll look at that question. Thanks, ZB. And then Coral Reef, I haven't forgotten you. We'll get to you. Then Angry Ginger, you'll have a chance to speak after Coral Reef.
Good
So
guys, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna quickly. I gotta go. Unfortunately, I gotta be up pretty early in the morning. But thanks for having me up, and it's been a great conversation, everyone.
we appreciate
Take
that you
care.
joined us, and thank you for your input and all your support and for being an ally.
Awesome. All right. Talk to you all soon.
Have a good
All
evening.
right.
Miigwech.
Hey, hey. Okay, Moni, did you reset? Did you submit your question again? I'm trying to keep up here. Okay, well, maybe while we wait for the question, we'll pass it over to Coral Reef. Go ahead. What would you like to discuss?
Just posted it.
Oh, she
Just
did?
posted it.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Then we'll go back.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
confused how people are sovereign nation and Canadian citizen.
Oh, okay. So remember this: we have treaties, and treaties are nation to nation agreements. So that starts with the acknowledgement right there is that First Nations are sovereign. They have their own ability to self-determine their governance structure. They before the settlers came and the newcomers arrived here, we were sovereign nations with language, governance structures, our own rules, our own trade networks, things like that, which give us the ability to determine for ourselves our path and direction. So that therefore we are sovereign in our nation. So, for example, I used to work in central Alberta here for the Louis Bull tribe. Louis Bull tribe is a member of the Musqueam Cree nations, but they have sovereignty. They are one nation of four First Nations in an area, but each of those four nations are sovereign nations who elect their own officials and can determine for themselves their paths, their goals, their aspirations, their mission, their vision. Each First Nation, many First Nations now have drafted their own constitutions, which guide their work and their relationships that they have with the Crown, both provincial and federal. But we're also citizens of Canada because when we're not working in our First Nations, we're paying taxes to Canada, and we can live off reserve if we so choose to. These are still shared lands, and many lands are unceded without treaty. So that's what gives us our sovereignty and our nationhood, is that we have treaties in place that acknowledge all the way back prior to even signing treaties. The Royal Proclamation acknowledges and lays the foundation for Aboriginal title to land. It's not, I'm not saying the Royal Proclamation is a great thing, but it is a starting point and has been pointed to in settling a lot of cases in front of the Supreme Court of Canada when it comes to Indigenous rights and Aboriginal title. So I hope that
I didn't
helps. And if
know that.
anybody else wants
Thank you.
to add to that, please do so. Maybe ZB, do you have anything you want to add from your studies that maybe didn't articulate well?
No. Honestly, I was trying to answer other questions, so I completely
Okay,
forgot about the
that's
question.
okay. Don't worry about it. No worries. Okay, I hope that helped, Moni. And Coral Reef, the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, hello. Hi. Um, so I'm a proud Mi'kmaq woman from the unceded territory of Mi'kmaqi. And I just gotta say, I love listening to these kind of conversations because I grew up in a very colonized world. I did grow up on reserve, but I went to school off reserve. My first language was English. I oftentimes, once I leave the reserve, I put on what I call my white girl voice. So just to more or less be taken seriously, right? And I was very scared of being in the sun when I was a child because I didn't want to be too brown, right? Because every time you go off reserve, I would almost get profiled. So, all that to say, I had a cute little story when Kev was speaking that I kind of wanted to share. So, sorry to take back a little bit,
That's
but
okay.
I had just graduated high school about 10 years ago, and I was going to post secondary university. And, you know, what's very common on reserve is we have numerous deaths that occur, oftentimes one after the other, right? So during that time, I had lost my uncle and my cousin within the span of a month. So that impacted my mental health, which of course impacted my studies. I ended up getting kicked out of university. I wasn't really sure what to do with my life. So one of my best friends was like, hey, let's move across the world. And I was like, all right, bet. So we had decided to actually move to Australia. And during that time in my life, I wasn't very, it was, I almost didn't want to learn about a lot about, you know, my teachings and my traditions, my cultures, my values, because I was tried so hard to be white, just to be accepted, right? So a lot of times when my dad would go on what I called tangents about our history and stuff, I often ignored it. So I was very colonized that way, right? So I worked my butt off, I saved up the money, and me and my friend ended up moving to Australia. And I saw there was a lot of cultural differences in terms of how the Canadian population treats Indigenous people versus Australia population, right? And I almost found that, like, down in Australia, it was somehow worse. Not in the sense because we both suffer equally, I would say, but it was almost like right there in your face. And to give you an example, I was traveling the Great Ocean Road, and there was a store that had a sign up that said no Aborigines allowed. And that was one of the first times I was I was struck, right? I was just like, whoa. And I kind of looked at my friend Helena, she's from Germany, and I said, I don't know if I can go in there because I'm not Aborigines, but I am an Aboriginal from Canada, right? Anyways, that's a side story. But what I'm really trying to get at is when I was down by the harbor at the Sydney Opera House, I was walking along the boardwalk there, and my dad really wanted a boomerang from an Indigenous person there. So there was a man standing there, and he was selling boomerangs, a bunch of other stuff. I walked up to him, and he looked at me, and he was like, "You're Indigenous, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Where are you from?" I said, "Canada." And he's like, "Well, what are you?" And I said, "First Nation," because that was just my automatic, it's just what I spat out at the time. And he said, "No, what are you?" And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Aboriginal?" And he said, "No, what are you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Where are you from?" I said, "Nova Scotia." He's like, "Well, what's the land out there?" I said, Mi'kma'ki. And he was like, "Okay, so what are you? What tribe?" And I said, Mi'kmaq. And he looked me dead in my eyes and he said, "Whatever you do, you present yourself as that. Never call yourself Indigenous. Call yourself Mi'kmaq." And in that moment, I kind of took it all in and I was like, whoa, I've, it was almost like a moment where I was like, oh, I can finally be proud of my tribe and who I am as a person. And I would say that was kind of like a turning point. And when I came back to Canada, I started doing more research. I started actually listening to my dad during his tangents, and I started learning a lot more, right? And through that, I would say that I became more proud of who I am and understanding, you know, what happened to my ancestors, right? And I almost got angry in the sense where I really wanted to start fighting it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that little tidbit.
Aw.
And I
Beautiful.
just thought it was really
That's
powerful. And when
crazy.
Kev spoke up, I was like, oh my God, connection.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well,
Thank you.
it's like I said, like with me, and it's same with you guys. The you are people of the land. You are the original, the real people of that land. And again, you're not Canadian. You're not Canada. Canada was born in your country.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Always remember that.
Yeah.
You are what your people are, and be proud of that.
That's such an amazing teaching. Thank you, Coral Reef, for sharing that, and thank you, Kev, for chiming in on. It reminds me too, like the efforts of the colonial system were like focused on making us feel shame, stripping us of our identity, making us scared to be who we are. And I see this in my father's generation, right, and his siblings, and how they felt about even my kokum felt shame for being an Indian, right, and tried to teach me that too. I'm fortunate that I didn't. My mom, who's the non-Indigenous parent, was really the person who instilled the pride in me to have pride of my identity. And it's so sad. I've learned more about the journey of our ancestors and what they endured so that we could still be here today through reconciliation. Like
I
I didn't
mean, it
know
went to
about
like
residential schools,
1994,
right?
like
Yeah.
where, like, I'm sorry for what we did. It's
Well, we'll turn the floor over to
disgusting.
you. Go ahead now.
No, no, please go ahead. Like, it's like what we did is despicable. Like, it's super sad.
Think and did and doing. It's not over is the saddest part of it all. I think sometimes because it's
Yeah.
still there are systems still in place that are designed to hold us down, minimize our rights, restrict us from advancing in education, just the barriers and things like, and coming from an Alberta perspective, I can speak to this because I am a duty to consult practitioner. The government of Alberta has done everything they can to just squeak in under the legal parameters when it comes to duty consult, which means that they have to understand how resource development impacts rights. And they have systemically built these processes that still minimize us, still do not consider our rights, do not consider our language, do not consider our attachment and our connection to land, how our identity is so woven into the land. And so it still happens today, sadly, and they write new policy and new legislation that still has designs to hold us down. And it's kind of like another, like, why I wanted to talk about this stuff. And with the upcoming election, when we think about who could be our potential prime minister, what policies are they thinking about putting in place, and how are they going to affect us? I hear a lot coming from the conservative side of this wing. We know we have the right and left wing, and it's all the same bird. We've heard those things, but sometimes there's just words that are used that are purposeful, right? Politicians use their words on purpose. They
Yeah,
choose
they
their
do.
words wisely. And Mr. Polyev talks a lot about red tape reduction, getting rid of gatekeepers. And I'm sorry, but I have taken it personally from the first time I ever heard red tape reduction. I'm like, we're the red tape. It's immediately where my mind went to is we're the red tape they want out of the way. So that's why I say they still
Exactly.
to this day.
I'm sorry, a guy's only job has been like a paper carrier. And
Yeah.
we're supposed to like call him a leader. He's not a leader in any sense of the word. Like, he's not a leader. He's never been a leader. He's always been a follower. And
And
that's
he's still
all
doing
he's
it.
ever gonna be. Is just a follower. He's gonna follow Trump. He's gonna follow whoever else. Like, he's not a leader. He's a bitch. I'm sorry.
There's
I'm sorry to
a
say
there's a
that.
reason
We have to
why
watch
Yes.
language so we don't get our
yeah.
live flagged.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
There's a
Sorry to say
reason why
that.
the end of Polyev's nose is darker than the rest of him.
True. And think about the Harper days and how much effort they put into minimizing all of the environmental
Yeah, he
protections.
was the guy standing behind Harper when
Yep.
Harper signed a deal in Russia, signing over Canada to China for 31 years. So,
Harper tried to install the white paper 2.0 when he was prime minister, which is what led to the Idle No More movement.
Yeah.
People wonder why the Idle No More movement started. That was why, was because, for those of you that don't know, in 1969, Jean Chrétien and Trudeau Sr. Came up with their brainchild, which was the White Paper of 1969, which was designed to, quote, make the Indians like the rest of Canada, with make them more Canadian, as he put it. In other words, he wanted to do away with reservations, do away with treaty rights, and said make them what he called regular citizens. So we fought him tooth and nail for almost a decade, and we eventually got him to back down.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, well, Angry Ginger, did you want more to add? Like, and we have two more folks that have joined the conversation, but I feel like you haven't given I haven't given you ample opportunity to add to the discussion. So if you
No,
want
it's
to,
good.
you're good. Okay, then we'll open the floor to our newcomers. I want to
Absolutely.
start with it looks like, does it start with a Q? QALBI? I don't want to mispronounce your name. So the floor is yours. Welcome.
Kalbi.
Kalbi?
Hi,
Lovely.
I'm
Hello.
Kalbi. Yes, I guess. Hello. I guess it's I want to learn more, but the girl that was talking, not knowing, like not being knowing about her tribe. I guess I'm from like Africa in East. I'm from Somalia, but that, and then my tribe is Darod. So how you find your people when you don't know your tribe? That is there documentation? How, like, if people, I know a little bit, people were put in the residential, how they find their way back home, how they know the tribe? Is there a documentation? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. I see ZB wants to respond, so I'll pass the floor to her, and then if I could add to the conversation afterwards.
So for me, my my grandfather went to Blue Quills residential schools. Blue Quills is right outside of Saddle Lake. That's how I know that we actually do have ties to Saddle Lake biologically. But also it's you can call into the nation and do your family tree that way. There are also organizations, if you are in fact from the Red River area and you are Métis, like they will do a family tree for you, is another way. And if
Might not
you
know what a
are,
Métis. Zebish might not know what a Métis is.
oh, a Métis, I don't know how to explain this because this sounds crazy to me.
Yeah,
Métis people are Cree people who are mixed with French. Like that's with a capital M,
okay.
and
Yeah.
then there's the
Yeah,
lowercase m, which means that
yeah.
you are mixed with European descent. There are two different categories of Métis people.
Sorry.
I'm not calling anybody half breed or anything. That is, I don't do
Okay.
that shit.
It says half breed on my
Okay.
dad's birth certificate. So,
Yeah, I
and
know,
I
but
was
I'm like,
raised,
I don't like that.
no, I don't either. But I was raised being told I'm a half breed. So I always identified as a half breed
Really?
as a child. But, it all depends on how you take it too, right? My
Yeah,
family just owned it. They were like, hey, we're half breeds.
I,
But,
my son-in-law is from Kikino, and I call him a hybrid.
yeah,
Half breed.
hybrid. But there was also the Métis come from also
Wow.
they're indigenous because they were here before the settlement of Canada. And the way I like to describe it is the Métis grandmothers are the First Nations aunties. So when the explorers first came from Europe, they often made friends and became part of the community that within the First Nations folks that were teaching them how to survive here, showing them how to use a canoe and run along the waterways and accessing furs. And those folks came here and made a life here prior to it becoming Canada, and also then made families with Indigenous women who shared language. Then they shared language, and they also shared culture that came from Europe. So that's why you see like the Métis people, their dance is the jig, and it's a combined dance of the powwow foot move with also the river dance of the Irish or Scottish folks. So it's a combined culture, but it was here
Yeah,
before
makes
the
sense
establishment of
now.
Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And also, so
Because
another
I was
thing.
like, it's different dance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
Is it like, sorry to cut you off, is it like it was a peaceful coexistence
It
when they
was
came from Europe? They followed the morals and we were welcomed.
at first it was very peaceful, and it was a cooperative gathering, like, coming together of different cultures. It wasn't until resources and, they saw the vastness of the land, and then folks started heading over this way for a better new life, and, on the lands that they took from us. But back to your question about identifying your tribe, and especially those that were taken in for residential school, or were experienced the 60s scoop. Those folks, there were records at the residential school. So a lot of the time, as time went on, it started to be that you could go home on the weekends, or your parents could come in and see you, and things like that. So, but that wasn't always the case. But they did keep records of where each student or child that was apprehended came from, so you could find your way back home that way. Um, and there's some, I think, that have totally lost their ways. But there's a good book. It's fiction, but it's based in reality, and it's called Five Little Indians, written by Michelle Good. If you're like, it's kind of a neat story about how
Oh,
residential schools survivors come out of residential school, and kind of their life journey following residential school. It's hard. It's, none of these reads are easy. They're hard to read because they make you sad, and but if you're interested, it's a good one to read.
can you say that again? I have to write it.
Yeah,
I would like to check it out.
sure. It's
The
called
name.
Five Little Indians. Because there was, when I was a kid, and I'm sure when the real native was a kid, we had a little, one little, two little, three little
My
Indians,
God,
four
yes.
little, five little, six little Indians. So there was a little nursery rhyme
Did you see
based on
when Bugs
counting
Bunny?
Indians.
Did you see when Bugs Bunny did it?
Yeah.
When he was
Thank you.
shooting the fort?
Yeah,
And
you're
then he scratches
welcome.
the one out and he goes, and then he scratches the one out and he goes, uh-oh, that one was a half breed.
Yeah, that's right. I've seen it
That
too.
cartoon's been removed. Did you know that?
Good. I
Yeah.
found it, actually. I think it is on YouTube still if you look for it. But okay, Kelby, if that was all from you, are you good? We'll move on to Ricci. Is that? And I want to make sure I'm saying her name correctly too. So,
Thank you so much.
no, thank you for joining our conversation. I appreciate having you here. Feel free to join us every Monday at 6. Okay, on to, is it Ricci? Is that?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, it's pronounced
Calvi,
Ricky.
thank you.
Okay, Ricky, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's
Forgive
okay.
me.
Everybody gets it wrong. I feel like they think it's Italian, but it's not. But yeah, I wanted to say, well, there's so many things I could say. I've been enjoying listening to everybody else though also. But growing up, to me, the most important thing that distinguished Canada from the United States was our, or at least what we were told, or I was told, growing up, that we were better to the Indigenous people and First Nations. I'm not sure which one is the better one to use, because I know people were asking in the comments, but sorry, this guy Jax is like trying to pretend like I'm a man or something. Like I don't know.
Or
Are people
Jax.
are people seeing this? Like it's like
Yeah, I see it.
like like it's like my brother's name is Robin. My mom liked the fact that my name sounded like a guy and my brother's name sounded like a girl. So like the fact that he's trying to do this, I'm just like, well, I don't even know why. Like it's so backwards.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, like so I grew up like in the GTA area, and my mom, she went to she worked 4 different jobs just to go send me to private school. And I don't know if that's why I have this experience where I went to these like longhouses for these like school excursions. And so I remember seeing them and like loving it so much and thinking like, yes, this is Canada. We care so much, and we're so much better than the United States because of this thing, because this was like the most important thing to me. And then like to grow up and especially more recently, not that it's new to everybody, obviously, but I feel like to just Canada as like a nation, the fact that we have residential schools and coming up and being known by everyone unless you're like in a hole in the ground. And I have to say that it's so upsetting to me. And like that like Canada to me is the people who were here before anyone came and tried to colonize or settle or anything like that. And yeah, I don't.
Did you know
Yeah.
that? Did you know there are actually people out there that still are just learning about residential schools, and there are religious groups out there that deny that residential schools were actually a thing.
Yeah, I've heard of those people. I've heard of people denying a lot of things that are obviously true. That like I don't know, what do we do with these people? Because it's if people want to be to bury their heads in ignorance, like it's all
There are actually people out there who say, you Indigenous people whine and cry, and you guys get so much.
Yeah.
If I ask them, usually I say, "Are you a farmer?" And they're like, "Yeah, so what?" And I tell them, "Okay, well, we will put a fence around your farm, and we will tell you you can't leave without our permission." And that's what reservations were like. And
I have had friends throughout my life that are from different
their immediate
tribes.
response is usually the same. It's usually that's not how reserves work.
Yeah, that's how it did work.
As if they know how it works.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like I've seen documentaries, but I also know people like personally who have parents and people like I had friends who didn't know their parents, and I didn't know back then. I thought they were just adopted, like, oh, just any child is adopted. Oh, not realizing, oh, if they were taken from parents that were here, that means they were ripped from their family. Like I didn't know, like like ignorance of a child,
Have you ever watched First Contact?
Oh yeah, that's a good one on APTN.
I will give you a story that happened to me personally. When that show came out, I had an uncle who had been sober for 10 years. And when that show came out, it brought back so many memories and hurtful feelings for him and anger that he picked up the bottle again, and within a year he drank himself to death.
Oh my gosh. It's such a shame. ZB, I do see that you want to add, and just quickly before we go to ZB, I want to talk about, I just want to add to, the folks that want to deny that these things happen. I sometimes can't help but wonder, is it guilt? They just, how guilt is a really ugly emotion to feel. And some of us don't want to feel guilty. Like, I was raised by a Catholic mom who made me feel guilty about a lot of things. So I know that guilt is an emotion I'm not a fan of. But I wonder sometimes if folks deny some of these things, or because it's easier than understanding the truth, and they don't want to have the guilt that they feel, because deep down somewhere they know that they benefited from the wrongs that happened to our ancestors and continue to happen to us today. But excuse me.
I would say yeah. I would say yeah. I do everything I can, every day to consider what I don't know and to accept what's true. And I guess yeah. I didn't really come on here for any real.
That's okay. No,
really, except I did want.
We appreciate that, though. We appreciate your conversation.
That's Canada to me is everything. I get I'm angry about so many things.
All of us are. I noticed that Phoebe wants to add, and then I know we do have Marie Smallboy who's joined our panel.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me talk.
And you're allowed to stay up, please, if you want to continue to have be part of the conversation. You're more than welcome. I'll let ZB add to the discussion, and then we'll turn it over to Marie.
Okay. First of all, Ricky, I just wanted to say a couple things. Number one, you are not the only Canadian, whether that is white or any other demographic, who didn't know about what we were going through and about how bad it was. So you have to give yourself grace in that. And that's like a level of forgiveness, right? But I have some book recommendations if you're open to book recommendations. That's what I wanted to add.
I did. I know this is kind of adjacent, but I did watch Pocahontas with the audio changed by that group that did that. They have it so you can watch the movie, but you can have the real story overlaid over top. I don't know.
Cool. I never knew that existed.
Sorry, does anyone know what I'm
Just
talking about?
recently,
Oh,
they did a voice overlay on Pocahontas that tells the real story.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was. I was like, oh, talking about books. I was like, oh, this was something that I enjoyed. That may be similar-ish. Because just as a, I don't know, aside, is like, I grew up and I loved Pocahontas, Mulan, and Beauty and the Beast. I was like, oh yeah, smart and strong and whatever. And Pocahontas, I always thought, sorry, I can't say that. Sorry, sorry. I just thought that the rest of it was really bad. I just fast forward through it because I was like, John Smith is the worst ever, and I was like, all this stuff sucks. And so I really enjoyed having that to
That's where they get the story wrong, because there was actually no evidence that she ever met John Smith.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just saying it's it was all about her and nothing about anything else from everything else sucked except for that. But anyway, thanks. I thought that was fun.
Okay, I couldn't find the.
Yeah, send me book.
I'll just tell them to you. So the untold history of Indigenous history in the United States, which will give you a more comprehensive history. But I am going to give you a disclosure warning. That shit is bad. It's a hard read. 21 things you should know about the Indian Act.
I got that one.
Unsettling Canada by Arthur Manuel.
Mm-hmm.
As one of our most famous Native activists out there, he did a lot of things for our people across Canada. And then lastly is Clearing the Plains.
Yep. It's another good one.
Again, that one comes with a trigger warning.
Yeah.
because that's bad.
We Were
Anyway,
Children.
Which
We
one?
Were
Real
Children is
name?
so good, but
Yeah.
oh my god.
Children, that one comes with a severe trigger warning. You're going to want to throw
Yeah,
your through the window.
Yeah.
yeah, because that one, oh my god. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
None of these are real easy reads, but they're worth reading. So, okay, let's turn it over to Marie Smallboy. Thank you for joining us. Kinanas Komtana. The floor is yours.
Kista nanas kumtinawa in tohtawiek. Stahaya. Kusekwan megwats nite wisaktehan. I'll translate. I'm grateful to you all for giving me your time and your space. My heart is heavy right now, for not just for our people, but for humanity as a whole. I've been journeying through the various lives and scrolling TikTok to see what's going on in the world. And I just want to emphasize to the young people the truths of our ancestors is key to our moving forward as human beings, joining spirits with our non-indigenous relatives, because the human family. Our sacred treaty, which is not written, is beyond the reach of the colonial being. Our ancestors, our creator, and our motherland sanctioned our relationship with the colonial being. And we have to have trust in that. We have to have trust in that. Our treaties are not to be messed with by, I don't know how to give them the nice name that I come up with this, the colonial being with a colonial mindset that has destroyed humanity and desecrated our motherland. And it's that focus right now that I'm my focus and my journeys through TikTok land is to bring an awareness of the importance of our language, because that was where our humanity lies, is within the sanctity of our language. So it's, I so want to, I go into these rooms, these lives, and I'm a very serious person. I'm 68 years old, so I kind of, my brain waves do not jive with with the hip hop, I guess. And I dance an old tune. I dance an old tune, and it rests with our peoples, the hearts of our peoples, and the spirit of our people to join. Not to me, our treaty is not, doesn't have a colonial number on it. It's beyond the reach of the colonial being, and for us to rely on our ancestors' truths in our human existence, why Creator created us. But I want to leave you with one thought in that treaty, why that treaty is beyond the reach of the colonial being. I have a PowerPoint and I presented it in various forms, but the question, why did our ancestors use the depth of the plow to symbolize how they were going to share our motherland with the colonial being? And I'll rest there for now, and allow some thoughts to why our ancestors use the depth of the plow.
No, Nokum. Um, our treaties, I've been told, no two-legged being can ever break them. I was told this by an elder. Is that true?
That's why I say our treaty is beyond the reach of the colonial being, because it rests on the natural law and the spiritual laws of the universe. That's what our treaty is based on.
So
So
these
you can't change the natural law, and you cannot change the spiritual laws that govern all humanity.
so these people that are worried about our those cows and plows, they say our treaties are gonna go away if we take them. And I was told that when I spoke to an elder about this, they said no being on two legs can take that away. Um, your treaties are sacred. Your treaties are beyond the white man's paper.
I would qualify that with if you look at the written text of the treaty, it's crafted by a colonial mindset. And in there it says that we surrendered our motherland, and two, that we accept dominion by the colonial being, and they will give us agricultural implements to teach us. They will teach us. That's how the residential schools came into being. Was they will teach us how to be farmers, YT farmers.
How to be muños.
Yes, and it's the legal wordsmithing under colonial concepts, colonial understanding, that those treaties are based. It's colonial law that gives sanction to those provisions under colonial beings' written law. And the agreements, the settlement agreements, have similar wording because they really want ownership through, whether through trickery, like the whole, I don't know, there's a word, trick or treat, where they will use the wording to and colonial processes to approve the wording without telling the people what it's truly saying. So we can't further sue them for stealing our land by crook, like by hook or by crook. And the hook is the agricultural benefits that they now assume that they own the land, and they promised us agricultural benefits. Whereas our understanding, and that goes back to the depth of the plow, our understanding, our interpretation of the treaty is the depth of that plow symbolizes our ancestors weren't stupid.
No, they weren't.
The depth of the plow symbolizes what the colonial being understood as agricultural use of the land only. That was the agricultural benefits we accorded the colonial being. But of course, we know how they went beyond, exceeded the depth of the plow. So they've turned the tables on us and now granting us agricultural benefits and so-called treaty rights.
See, our chief has been working on these things for 2 years, and he caught that part about the future lawsuits and litigation, and he handed it back to our lawyer, and he said they got to take that out. They got to get rid of that, and he said you can't. And my brother told him. He said you're fired. He said we'll get a lawyer who will do that.
Yeah.
So they fired the lawyer who's been working on it for almost 2 years, because he kept doing sneaky stuff that, seemed like he was working for the government more than for us.
Yeah.
So my brother got rid of him.
Yeah. One of the things that most young leaders, one is they don't understand the treaty itself. our version anyway. They understand the written text, but not our version.
Yeah.
And two, the lawyers that we use are swear allegiance to the monarchy, the imperial crown. That's where their allegiance lies. So they have to word those documents to protect the queen's or king's interests in our motherland, which we never allowed them. We never relinquished or ceded or surrendered our collective interests in the treaty lands that are protected by our ancestors, by Creator, and by our motherland. That's my understanding.
Thank you, and appreciate that perspective and sharing that understanding with us. CB, you wanted to add to the conversation?
Because of the amount of outrage that we have had over our treaties and the land surrender clause in numbered treaties, modern day treaties now have it written into it that there's no secession of land, but they also have it. There's another way to shaft us, basically, but it basically means that there will come a time and a point when our treaties end when you are under modern day treaty because they're pushing for you to be a municipality.
See, and that's where a lot
So,
of our reserves are pushing back.
yeah.
It's the grassroots that are pushing back, not the leadership, because the leadership are creations of colonial Canada. So they're bound to follow colonial Canada's rules. And that pertains to any colonial processes that they can manufacture consent on the cessation of our lands.
This, this is such an interesting conversation, and I've heard this come up time and time again in the last few years now, talking about like the 10-year funding arrangements that are being offered, and this whole desire of Canada to create like First Nation municipalities. I personally don't think that those things could ever derogate or abrogate those treaties. Like those treaties are in place, and but this is just also I full disclosure. Like I learned where I started learning was at the Department of Indian Affairs. Right, I was raised by an Indigenous parent who is assimilated and suffered from the shame of being Indigenous that was imposed upon him. I first started learning about my indigeneity and gaining an understanding of where I come from because of my work and my career that I had at Indian Affairs, now Indigenous Services. So I acknowledge 100% that I come with colonial baggage. But sometimes I wonder, like if that can't if these processes weren't able to dissolve treaty, is it so awful for us to perhaps be treated like a municipality, maybe not having a relationship with the province, but if it's the federal government that's doing transfer payments directly to First Nations to provide the services and programs in their own way, under their own sovereignty, and not the Colonial Indian Act? I feel like that's from my perspective, I feel like it would be a positive outcome. But I do agree with what Marie said too, that these leadership that we currently have in most of our First Nation communities are colonial. It's prescribed through the Indian Act. It's not our ways. It's not in line with natural law and or our way of governing ourselves. But that's just from where I come from. But ZB, go ahead.
This is just a question. Okay, for I think we're all in Canada here. For those of you that remember Wet'suwet'en, when I hope I'm pronouncing her her name right, but when Freda Houston went before the UN, and she did take our treaties to England, and they turned around and said, your treaties are with Canada. Now, if our treaties are with Canada and not the British Empire, does that mean that if we get invaded by the States, that the British Empire is not coming to back up Canada? And does that mean that we don't have backing when it comes to going to the table to talk with the insane lunatic to the south?
I've thought about this a lot too. But from everything I've read, because this scares me also, Canada's a commonwealth. Right? Regardless of, we do have our own constitution now, but we are part of the British Commonwealth. And from what I understand, because I have asked around too, like what would happen, and most people and folks that I've even talked to that are from military do say that NATO and the Commonwealth would come to support us. But my fear is, if Donald Trump is partnering with Putin, Putin's coming from the north and Donald's coming from the south. And I'm like, and they both have very strong militaries. But I think this is an important conversation to have, because
Absolutely.
our people also went to war and were disenfranchised and made promises back in World War I and World War II that were never ever realized. And here we are again, potentially facing another world war, or of some form of unrest, maybe civil war in the south, and then maybe it's a trade war here only, but we don't know. We can't predict what's going to happen. So I think this is a really good conversation to have. And I do want to be mindful of time. We are nearing 9 o'clock. I haven't had supper yet, but I don't want to end, because this is such a critical conversation. But I want to pass it on. So who would like to join in on that conversation, and how the role of our treaties in defending these lands? Is that kind of where you're going, ZB? Yeah.
Can I just respond to that?
Please. Yes, please.
What got me going on my travels through the lives? I even went to the political platforms for the race for prime minister, and there's one video. I don't know if any of you have come across it, but it's called "The Myth of Canada." It's on YouTube. I would recommend you watch that. Not to indoctrinate anyone into believing that Canada is a myth, but to explore in the discussion of that video where in there they mention our treaty. They won't because it's our treaty that is the foundation of Canada's existence on our motherland. We gave them permission to share the land with us. We did not give them permission to take over our motherland. That's our responsibility. So I just wanted to respond with that we need to be careful how we relate to colonial powers that are assumed powers. Indian Act and is an assumed jurisdiction over our humanity, and over our motherland. It's an assumed jurisdiction, and it follows the concepts that are introduced in the whole treaty. And I just want to close with this. I'm a direct descendant of Giskayo, Chief Bobtail, who was blacklisted during the Riel Rebellion and was taken off the treaty annuity pay lists and was labeled as a rebel chief. And they took his reserve and minimized it and sold the rest of his reserve to the Soldier Settlement Board of Canada. And it's one big legal mess, but because of the I'm going to venture out to say and say the indoctrinated leadership fought a legal battle against the descendants of Giscayo and for the peoples he entered into the treaty relationship with. And we lost that legal battle because of the interpretations given to our treaty were done by the lawyers in accordance with the written text. They did not take our understanding, which goes back to the depth of the plow. The purpose of the depth of the plow. It maintained peaceful it would have maintained peaceful coexistence, but that's one of our sacred undertakings as a people, is to maintain peaceful coexistence with all that exists, with all creation, including the colonial being. So we have to think for the colonial being as well.
Wow.
And the other reason is there would be no numbered treaties. There would be no territories. Our sacred treaty does not have a number in the spiritual realm of our existence. I'll end it there. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much, Marie, for speaking with us and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your insight. It gives me a lot to think about, because the depth of the plow has been something too. I wondered about when these treaties were being negotiated, and I felt maybe it was because we are good, kind people too. Like you say, we wanted peace and harmony, and I felt like maybe that was agreed to because our ancestors understood that farming was what was important to these newcomers, and how they would sustain themselves. So we would agree to that because we, of course, wouldn't want them to be starving and stuff. I'm sure, unlike what happened to our people. But I was always wondering. So I thank you so much.
Yeah, they were adhering to the natural law and spiritual laws. That's what they based our treaty on. So those are the laws that keep our treaty in the spiritual realm of our existence. It cannot be unwritten. It's in our hearts. We live it. It's in our genes. And we always carry it every step we walk on our motherland. That's what we carry.
That way. Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And so it's 5 to 9. I just want to, ZB, I think you wanted to add something to the discussion?
I was actually saying Tapway when you were saying Tapway. I just didn't have my mic on.
Oh, okay. All right. And then so Ricky, how are you feeling? Or did you want to add anything more? Or?
No, no, everything was great. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you for joining the conversation. That's every Monday at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. We do at Beaver Politics. We're hosting the Indigenous Matters. I welcome you all to come back. Real Native, do you want to give us some closing thoughts, and then we'll end up. And I'm still trying to remember how to pronounce your name, Thistotantine, I think, but you'll have to tell me again. But let's Real Native, if you want to.
That's Hanot Inat Ekri. Yeah, can I just, while you have me here, just a quick note. The Dene were not given the depth of we didn't depth of a plow because there were no farmers in your area. We lived on the land. We come from the land.
Yeah.
So, and our treaty, there's no cede and surrender.
Right.
So just to let the people know that not all the treaties that they did across this country, even though it looked the same on paper, we weren't given the same benefits. We had to fight for hours right up. I think we started in the 70s. After 1970, So that's when we started asserting our rights under actually international laws too. So just to close off there, and Marcy Cho.
Thank you. And that's really a good, a really good point to bring up, though, is that these treaty areas, when we think about the numbered treaties, number 1 to 11, they're vast areas that are homelands to many different languages, cultures, and different, tribes of Indigenous and First Nations people. So that's very true. Like these blanketed agreements was an attempt to apply it to of people that may not have had similar relationships with resources and each other, and so it causes that in itself can be problematic, I think. So thank you for reminding me of that. I appreciate that. And Real Native, do you have anything more you'd like to add?
Halfway, hi, Cookum. Not much. We need to make sure that the conservative government doesn't get in. I don't see anything good coming from them. Indigenous people, we need to unite and do what we did when Harper tried the same thing. What Trump is doing down in the States, I see Polyev doing up in Canada. I honestly do. I just want to close with saying that. Let's get the Indigenous vote out and let's do what we did 16, what was it, 8 years ago? We got rid of Harper. And let's make sure they don't come back.
The will of the people.
They don't. I don't see anything. I don't see that they've changed their. Matter of fact, they've taken Harper's right hand man and they got him at the helm now. So that doesn't tell me that things have changed there.
Right.
I want to quickly answer somebody's question.
Yes, please.
So when it came to British Columbia, it was actually by the time that they had explored, they had gotten to British Columbia, what is known now as British Columbia, and they had said, y'all aren't people, we aren't signing treaty with you. This is coming from lawyers and professors of what they said to our people out here in BC. That's why they don't have treaty. That's why they are unceded territories, is because they wouldn't sign treaty with them. They didn't view them as people, and that's why they didn't have treaties.
And they got to where they wanted. The rail was built. They got to where they wanted. They felt they didn't need to. The treaties came. The number of treaties came as a need to settle the West, and we did have some fierce people on the prairies that stood their sacred grounds. And these folks that wanted to make their way west and settle Canada knew that they had to make some kind of concession with them. So. And then by the time they got to BC, I feel like you're right. Like they just like, we don't need to negotiate with you anymore. We don't see you on equal footing. You're not even humans in the eyes of some of those settlers.
And I want to say hi to Cookum, small boy.
Yes,
Thank you for your words.
Fun fact: the Governor General who signed Treaty 6 with us on behalf of the Crown got fired right after that because he was not supposed to sign it for all time.
Ah, interesting. Good to know.
My brother found that little piece out. He's he had his own consulting firm.
Yeah, I've read some awful documents that are in the archives and stuff, but thank you, Real Native. Thank you, ZB, and everybody else that came up. I'm still trying to remember how to pronounce your name properly. Our Dene participant and Ricky, thank you for joining the conversation, and everybody else that was here and that has dropped off. Hi, Kinanaskomta Marie. I really appreciate your voice and for sharing with us. I appreciate you all. Remember, every night of the week now, we have Beaver Politics. Monday, every night, 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time is Indigenous Matters. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, is the News Hour with Frontline Feminist. Wednesday is Next Gen with the Radicals. Thursday is Beaver Politics open discussion. Friday is the debate. And I think last Friday they were still debating at 4 o'clock in the morning. So sounded like it was a good one. I stayed on for a couple hours, but that I was done. So I appreciate you all. Please, you're welcome to come back and join us in these conversations. I love that we're creating unity and we're getting to know each other. And I hope that we can carry on, for as long as we need to and continue to build these relationships. So I appreciate you all. Many blessings to you. Safe travels. Muestas.
Muestas.